Chapter 2946. He looked like a handsome guy with delicate features. He was a little fresh meat. It was just that the body was a little big, not a little big, but very big. Some people were busy, and some were like Ning Shu and the Chongsam man, watching carefully and not making a move easily. Ning Shu touched his arm, feeling uncomfortable, and said to the Chongsam man, "Let's go, this is obviously not something we can covet now." No matter who the body was, it was obviously placed here by someone. If they suddenly intruded into someone else's territory, the owner might get angry and kill them. Kill you rats who steal food. And it might be the same kind of person as the sleeping giant. For example, the body of His Excellency was also very big. His Excellency was cold, and the scariest thing was that he wanted to eat souls. The more Ning Shu thought about it, the more he felt that His Excellency was related to this body. Such a big body, ordinary people really couldn't carry it. Ning Shu subconsciously touched her hair bun. It hadn't come out yet. Wait a little longer. The Chongsam man said, "If something is wrong, we will leave immediately." Wait, what? If we wait until something is wrong, we won't be able to escape. Wealth comes from danger. That's also something that can be asked for, but we can't. In this situation, Ning Shu felt a little scared. He didn't know if this feeling came from the sleeping corpse, or from other aspects. Anyway, he had a very bad feeling. Looking carefully at the hand of the Chongsam man holding the fan, his knuckles were already white, obviously he was using a lot of strength. Obviously, he also realized that there might be danger, but after a trip and spending a lot of money to buy a spatial passage, he didn't get anything. Ning Shu pursed his lips, and wanted to leave the Chongsam man behind. Are we going or not? The feeling in his heart was getting stronger and stronger, and he felt that danger was getting closer and closer. Some mission takers were still working on the giant's body, but they didn't make any progress, because their strength was too weak to move such a big body. At least a person of this size could cause any destructive damage to this body. Ning Shu couldn't help but want to scratch his head, but when he thought of the bun on his head, he put down his hand. He couldn't scratch the bun loose. Even in a crisis, he couldn't reveal the green on his head. He would rather die than reveal his true colors. Ning Shu glanced around and saw Grand Elder Tai Shu, who was in black, floating not far behind him. He was silent and motionless. Only the corners of his windbreaker moved occasionally. He was wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, and the lenses refracted a cold luster. The glasses seemed to have vaporized, and his eyes could not be seen. Ning Shu tugged at the Chongsam man. The Chongsam man snapped, "Why are you tugging at me? Men and women shouldn't touch each other. Don't kiss your sister. Run." Ning Shu grabbed the Chongsam man, afraid that the system would send him back. When the Chongsam man saw the judge, he was also shocked. He ignored it and teleported away with Ning Shu. When the others saw the movements of Ning Shu and the Chongsam man, especially when they saw the judge, they were all shocked. They flew everywhere like frightened birds. However, unknowingly, the surrounding space had been controlled and sealed. There was no way to leave at all. Ning Shu's heart collapsed when he heard the system say that he couldn't teleport. She was really just here to watch the show. He didn't know when this person appeared. He was silent and didn't move at all. What's wrong with him? He's just like the class teacher who peeped at the back door. Then, he quietly sealed this space, making it impossible for people to escape. Why is this person so bad? He has such a bad taste. Ning Shu kicked the silver-haired man. If he had left earlier, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Fuck. The Chongsam man fanned himself a little hurriedly. Obviously, his heart was in a mess. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes, looked at Grand Elder Tai Shu, and then looked at the huge body over there. He guessed that this body couldn't be Grand Elder Tai Shu's, right? But it didn't look like him. Maybe he changed his soul's face to make his style more ghastly. But it might not be Grand Elder Tai Shu. In any case, this seemed to be something that Grand Elder Tai Shu was guarding. In short, this time, he bumped into the muzzle of a gun. He earned 100,000 merit points this time. Whether it was his life or money, Ning Shu couldn't afford it. Gather here. Grand Elder Tai Shu's voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in this space. His tone was light and didn't fluctuate, but this made people even more afraid. There was no other way. Everyone gathered here. Ning Shu and the silver-haired man went over there. Ning Shu looked at the Cheongsam man with a little resentment. The Cheongsam man touched his nose with his fan and whispered, "I've implicated you this time. Was it useful to say this now? Let's get through this first." After such a thing happened today, the elders who provided the information and the people who wandered in the void world looking for treasures would be unlucky. They definitely had to be reorganized. They would take advantage of the situation and settle down for a period of time. After they rose from the ashes, they would be reorganized again. In fact, the organization didn't allow the huge profits in the void world on the surface, but their attitude in private was ambiguous. Cigarettes and alcohol were harmful to the body, but they were still allowed to be produced and sold. However, they were the most heavily taxed of all industries. This time, the news of selling hit the muzzle of a gun. You. Grand Elder Tai Shu pointed at Ning Shu and the Cheongsam man. The law taxes for 100 years. You can go. The Cheongsam man, Ning Shu, was expressionless. 100 years, 100 years, and another 100 years. He was already numb. He was fearless. Ning Shu dragged the Cheongsam man away. When he turned back, he saw Grand Elder Tai Shu holding a gun. The black muzzle was pointed at the mission enforcer. The mission enforcer looked terrified. He seemed to be explaining something, but the other party didn't listen at all. He was killed directly. Nothing was left. He vanished into thin air. Seeing that the souls of the people around them were scattered and even their soul power was taken away, some people looked terrified. They even united to attack the judge. They might survive. However, this was obviously futile. Resistance only made them die more miserably. Something like a fishing net was shot out from the black muzzle and directly wrapped around the mission enforcer. This kind of net would get tighter and tighter. The mission enforcer was wrapped up and cried out in pain. His soul was also forced to curl up into a ball. It became smaller and smaller, and his cries became more and more shrill. Direct obliteration was instant death, but this kind of obliteration was torture. People were afraid of people who could control their own lives. Ning Shu trembled and quickly left with the silver-haired man. He used the silver-haired man's system and left directly. In addition to Ning Shu and the silver-haired man, some people were pardoned. However, it was inevitable that they would lose money to avoid disaster. None of the people who touched the corpse could escape. Some of the ice layers were about to be broken through. Ning Shu and the Cheongsam man appeared in the system space. It was the Cheongsam man's system space. As soon as he entered the space, he heard a woman's voice. "Zhu Li, do you fucking want to die? Why are you doing such a dangerous thing? Don't forget that I'm tied to you. If you die, I'm done for." Chapter 2947. Next time, before you do something, can you use your pig brain? Your brain must be filled with trash. Fuck off, following a mission enforcer like you is such a pain in the ass. Ning Shu was speechless. What a bad-tempered system. And it was a girl. The Cheongsam man sighed. Alright, it's my fault. Didn't I come back alive? Fuck off, the system cursed and stopped talking. Ning Shu pretended not to hear their conversation and looked at the Cheongsam man's system. It was his first time in someone else's system space. The Cheongsam man's system space was decorated in a way that was hard to describe. It was more feminine, with all kinds of cute pillows and small decorations. It felt like only a little girl would like it. To dress up his own system space like that, he was either a trap or gay. Faced with Ning Shu's strange look, the Cheongsam man was helpless and let his system send him to the restaurant. Although the bad-tempered system did not say anything, it still sent the two of them away. The Cheongsam man explained immediately, "That's not my aesthetic, it's the system's arrangement. Every time I change into a tough straight man style, but after completing a mission, it becomes like this again. I tried a few times, but I let her do whatever she wants. I gave up struggling. Although my system has a bad temper, I think she's a little girl. Little girls like these things, so what's wrong with letting her do it?" Ning Shu nodded and said, "You don't have to explain, I understand. What I'm more concerned about now is," Ning Shu grabbed the Cheongsam man's collar, his face ferocious. "Thanks to you, I won't have to pay taxes for 100 years again. I fucking went to 3 cities and didn't get a single tax." Ning Shu shook the Cheongsam man hard. He had to make the first move. I was also shocked, scared to death. Ning Shu shook him agitatedly, the bun on his head also shaking. "Your hair is loose," the Cheongsam man said. Ning Shu immediately let go of him and tidied up his hair bun. He looked at the Cheongsam man and said, "Are you happy to be cheeky? You won't have 100 years of taxes left." The Cheongsam man's face trembled a little. It was probably the first time he had been fined, so he couldn't accept it. Unlike Ning Shu, who was already a wily old fox. There was no difference whether it was 300 years or 500 years. In any case, there had been no taxes for a long time. The Cheongsam man's taxes were not a small amount, but Ning Shu's 3 tax cities were not small either. But this money had nothing to do with him. Ning Shu tidied up the meatballs and sat down to drink tea. "Fortunately, we didn't make a move. Otherwise, we would have died. That's the only way I can think of it." The man in the Cheongsam was very upset. His expression was gloomy because he didn't get anything. The man in the Cheongsam said that he was just going to take a look, but in his heart, he was still thinking of getting something. Now that he thought about it, buying the spatial passageway and paying 100 years of taxes was a huge loss. The space passage was a one-way ticket because the location of the space node was determined and connected to the place that could be reached. But ordinary people didn't know where the space node was. They didn't know where the space node was, and even the train didn't know where to go. The man in the Cheongsam was quite rich, but losing the tax made him feel pain for a long time. It was as painful as when Ning Shu was fined 100 years for the first time. But the second and third time, his heart didn't waver. After being depressed for a while, the man in the Cheongsam asked Ning Shu, "What do you think that corpse has to do with the judge? Is the judge guarding that body? Then what's its identity?" Ning Shu drank tea and swallowed. "How would I know?" She guessed that the corpse might be Jing Qing's. After all, Jing Qing, who used to be the system lord, was in a soul state. Since it was a soul, what about the body? If that corpse was Jing Qing's, would senior uncle, who came from the same origin, also be so big and ugly? Now, he had just shrunk his figure. TSK, 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 only Excellency was a huge monster. Ning Shu was glad that she didn't pay the fine directly. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to take out the money. Fine the tax, fine the tax. Ning Shu followed along and didn't do anything. She spread her hands and asked the man in the Cheongsam for money, 100,000 merit points. The man in the Cheongsam was speechless. "I've also suffered heavy losses now. Who should I ask for it from?" Money made people stingy. In the past, she didn't need to care about 100,000 merit points. Now, she couldn't help but care. "That's none of my business. Anyway, you have to give me 100,000 merit points." Ning Shu was quite ruthless. The man in the Cheongsam took out 100,000 merit points and waved his hand. I don't want to see you. Leave. Ning Shu left quickly. I told you to leave earlier, but you didn't. Corpses are very unlucky. Who told you not to listen to your elders? This was a valuable lesson learned by people who were always unlucky. The man in the Cheongsam rubbed his eyebrows and sighed. He looked like a melancholy handsome man. Ning Shu thought about it and went directly to the alley to find Elder Qi. When Elder Qi saw Ning Shu, he stroked his beard and asked with a smile, "Little girl, what treasure do you want this time?" Ning Shu told him. You're in big trouble this time. Ning Shu told him everything that had happened before. You have to be prepared. You'll definitely be punished. If there's any good world in the future, remember to tell me. When Elder Qi heard this, he hurriedly packed up his things and rolled up the package. He ran away like a small merchant who heard that the city government was coming. Before he left, he said to Ning Shu, I'll give you a discount next time you come. Ning Shu waved goodbye. It was appropriate to do a favor. After fixing the crooked ball, Ning Shu wanted to return to the system space. It wasn't his life to make a fortune. It was better to do missions and get more soul power for the world tree to absorb. Maybe when the world tree grew, it wouldn't stay in his head. The most anxious thing now was the grass in his head. As soon as Elder Qi ran away, the senior grand-uncle appeared. Ning Shu bumped into him. The senior grand-uncle glanced at the empty stall and frowned at her. Ning Shu greeted him. You're also here to find Elder Qi. Elder Qi has already left. When I came, he was already gone. The senior grand-uncle said, I realize that you're a very creative person. You're everywhere. Ning Shu smiled honestly with a pure and innocent expression. You're joking. I'm not everywhere. The main thing is that you can always see me when I'm picking up trash. This is your illusion. Ning Shu asked, have you found Jingqing? He used to be my system. I'm concerned about him. You want him to be your system? Why do you care so much? Ning Shu's face suddenly turned green. She immediately waved her hand and made an inviting gesture. Have a safe trip. The senior grand-uncle disappeared in an instant. Ning Shu breathed a sigh of relief. She was frightened and wanted Jingqing to be her system. This ghost story was so scary. She would never ask again. Otherwise, others would misunderstand that she couldn't bear to part with Jingqing. If something happened and Jingqing was given to her again, she wouldn't even know where to cry/BK. Chapter 2948. She checked everything that needed to be checked, such as the enchantments of the 3 law cities. She clicked on the system to exchange for some fasting pills and medicine, and then said to the system, go and do the mission. For the first time, there was something that could go with her to do the mission, and that was the world tree above her head. You are about to be transferred to the world, please be prepared. The backup system said. During the transfer process, it was not as uncomfortable as before. Her soul was stronger, but her hair was scattered, and her hair slapped her face. The world tree above her head was swaying in the wind. Integrated into a body, Ning Shu opened her eyes, and bubbles came out of her mouth. It was the underwater world. The coral palace was magnificent and magnificent. Looking down at her body, a pink fishtail, a human upper body, and a shell covering her chest. Her seaweed-like hair rippled in the water. It was really beautiful. Ning Shu swung her fishtail. She was used to walking on 2 legs and was not used to swinging her body with only 1 fishtail. She practiced her balance while accepting the plot. This world should be more magical, after all, there were even mermaids. As soon as she saw mermaids, she thought of the famous fairy tale, but the plot Ning Shu received was not like that. It could be said that it was poles apart, completely different. And this was a fairy tale. Compared to the innocent and simple stories of children, this story was more adult and dark. All fairy tales were constantly reborn, and in the end, they became different. In the end, the princess and the prince were happily together. The client was the seventh princess. As a favored child, she lived happily in the underwater world. She wandered on the bottom of the sea, and climbed up the reef with her sisters when she had nothing to do, singing with a beautiful voice. Everyone who heard it was fascinated, but it made the crew and sailors in the sea particularly afraid. They thought that the mermaid's voice was used to lure humans and then eat them. People yearned for things they did not have, and this princess yearned for life on land. But mermaids had no legs and could not walk on land. Without water for a long time, mermaids could not survive. During a storm, she saved the prince on the ship. The mermaid looked at the handsome prince and sent him ashore. The prince was not unconscious. Seeing the mermaid, she said that in order to repay the mermaid for saving her life, she invited him to her country as a guest. But the little mermaid refused because she didn't have legs and couldn't walk. The two of them exchanged names. Because there was no one around, the prince could only watch as the beauty swam away. He even told the little mermaid Emily that he would always wait for her to come. The mermaid's heart trembled. She swam anxiously in the deep sea and finally went to find the witch at the bottom of the sea. She exchanged her throat and hair for a bottle of potion. Drinking the potion would turn her fishtail into a pair of legs. In fact, the prince and his fiancée were already married and living happily in the castle. Emily was a Spartan, and the prince was with someone else. The guards of the castle found a mermaid wandering around the castle and brought her to the prince. The prince recognized her as a mermaid. He happily locked up the mermaid and let her cry. Her tears fell to the ground and became pearls. Because there was no voice, the mermaid could no longer sing, but when the prince held a banquet, he would let the mermaid show off her beautiful singing voice. But the mermaid was already mute. Since she couldn't sing, she could only dance. Every step the mermaid took was as painful as walking on a knife's edge. Dancing was very painful. The mermaid had no choice but to dance because the prince said that when she couldn't cry anymore, she would be of no use. He would cut her body into pieces and boil them into shark oil. Then the oil would be used to light a lamp, and it could even reach a state where it would never go out. Many witches used this kind of oil lamp. And the scales on the mermaid's body were also valuable. They were the size of a leaf and had a bright luster. The prince loved to collect them, and there were already more than 10 scales of different colors in his collection room. When her sister gave her a dagger and told her to find a way to escape, the prince noticed and took the dagger away from the little mermaid. The next day, the mermaid was finished. With a beautiful wish, she endured the pain and went ashore, but in the end, this was the result. Ning Shu felt that she had entered an extremely dark world. Snow White, who lived next door, had an incestuous relationship with her father. She was caught in bed by her mother and then ran away. She was kissed by the prince and spat out the poisoned apple stuck in her throat. She resolutely abandoned the 7 short and poor dwarves and lived a happy life with the prince. Next door, Sleeping Beauty was cursed into a deep sleep. The prince didn't wake her up by kissing her, but by sexually assaulting her. They even gave birth to a child. When the child suckled, what it absorbed was the finger. The spindle sawdust stuck in the finger was sucked out, and the curse and poison were gone. So Sleeping Beauty woke up. She was quite mature. It was also difficult for a man to control himself when a woman was sleeping in front of him and didn't know anything. The little mermaid Emily's wish was to take revenge on Prince Hickle and protect her sea and kingdom. Mermaids were often fished out because of their beauty. Especially when they cried, they would drop pearls. In this world where pearls were scarce, clams hadn't been cultivated yet. To get pearls, one could only dive into the deep sea. Pearls were also very precious. Their entire body was a treasure, and it was easy for humans to covet them. The little princess thought that the prince was doing something to her, but in fact, the prince was just coaxing her. They were not the same species. In fairy tales, Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty were all humans. Emily was more miserable because she had legs, so she was more likely to be violated. The other mermaids that were caught by humans were all fishtails. The beauty of mermaids was already coveted, and this one had legs. Her legs could be spread open, so it was very tempting for men. And the prince's wife, Karina, knew that her husband was having an affair with a mermaid, so she tortured the mermaid even more. Not long after the mermaid died, the king died, and the prince became the new king. After becoming king, he had more power and could collect mermaids and whatnot. After being hunted on a large scale, the mermaids could only stay in the deep sea and didn't dare to swim in the shallow sea. If they weren't careful, they would be caught in a fishing net. Ning Shu gritted his teeth. What a dark story. Since he wanted revenge, he had to kill the prince. After killing the prince, even if he wasn't the king, there wouldn't be a large-scale hunt for mermaids. This was killing two birds with one stone. However, the prince was the only main character in the world, so there were many girls who were paired with him. Chapter 29:49. The princes were very busy. They were busy saving princesses everywhere. As for protecting the mermaid clan, this little princess would be the next mermaid king if nothing unexpected happened. Protecting the sea and her clan was her responsibility. It was not long before the storm. This time, the prince fell into the water. Just push him into the sea and drown him. Anyway, it was a storm. It was normal for the prince to die if the boat capsized. After planning the steps of the mission, Ning Shu also relaxed. He shook the fish tail and paddled in the water. Fortunately, he could use the rules. He was very comfortable in the water and did not feel any discomfort. He looked at his fishtail. It was so painful that it turned into a pair of legs. He tore the fishtail apart and under the effect of the potion, it turned into a pair of legs. In fact, it was still a fishtail. The injured and bloody fishtail supported the weight of the body and he still had to walk step by step. How painful. Ning Shu did not want to suffer this. He even became a mute. His thick and beautiful seaweed-like hair was also gone. In the end, he even became a bubble. Ning Shu felt that Emily was a different race. She became the most tragic protagonist in a fairy tale. Others were happy with the prince, but she became a bubble. Humans and demons were different. Ning Shu tried to see if he could cultivate. Mermaids were very fast in the water. Other than that, they did not have any combat power. They were a beautiful race that would not age. Some human noble women would eat mermaids to maintain their beauty. They wanted to be like mermaids, beautiful and youthful. They had many good things on them, but they did not have the strength to match them. The deep sea was their protection, but out of the sea, they were weak and vulnerable. As for magic, it did not exist. Even dragons could be defeated, let alone the weak mermaids. Male mermaids were slightly stronger, but they were not as valuable as female mermaids. Humans captured female mermaids. Ning Shu sat on the coral. Many mermaids swam around him. There were both men and women. The scales on their bodies were of various colors. All of them were very good-looking. None of them were ugly. They held hands in twos and threes as they swam and danced in circles. Their fishtails swayed flexibly, allowing the mermaids to perform difficult movements. "Emily, Emily, where are you?" Someone called out to Ning Shu. Ning Shu immediately swam towards the sound wave. "I'm here, sister. It's time for dinner, Emily. Did you float to the surface again? The elders have warned us that the sea is very dangerous. There are big fish that can eat us. The scariest thing is a human with legs." As his sister nagged, Ning Shu nodded. The meals of the mermaids were all small fish, raw. Everyone had a fish and gnawed on it. Of course, there were also fruits. There were also fruits on the seabed and some plants. How could one describe the taste of the food? It was actually quite delicious. Sitting at the top were the mothers of the mermaids. In fact, the mermaid race was a bit of a matriarchal society. It seemed that the fathers of the mermaid sisters were different. Of course, this was the benefit of the queen. The other mermaids still had to find partners, some for life, some temporarily. The queen looked at Ning Shu lovingly and asked, "Where did you go today?" "I was at the coral reef." "I didn't go anywhere. I just watched them dance," Ning Shu said honestly. "There are so many children. I'm only worried about you. You have to remember that humans are very scary creatures. They will catch us." The queen stroked Ning Shu's thick hair. Ning Shu subconsciously wanted to tilt his head so that the world tree on his head would not be gone. But then he realized that he had merged with the world. The world tree would not be on his head. If it was in the past, Emily would definitely refute. Were there no good humans? But now, Ning Shu nodded. "Mother, don't worry. I'll remember." The queen was very happy that her daughter was so sensible. She said to her daughters, "You are all adults now. You can find partners." The sisters smiled and talked about what kind of partners they wanted to find. For example, the color of their tails, the color of their hair, and how strong their bodies were. Ning Shu didn't think about finding a partner. He just stared at his tail. How do mermaids mate? What kind of partner does Emily want to find? Queen Ning Shu asked. It depends on fate. You can't just find one. You have to give birth to the best children for the mermaid tribe. I've prepared several strong and handsome men for you. You can see if there's anyone you like. If you like them, you can keep them. A few? Keep them all. Ning Shu expressed that he had seen a lot and was not surprised at all. Looking at the queen's natural look, Ning Shu smiled. Thank you, mother. I'll choose and see. Maybe I don't like anyone. Maybe there's someone I like. The prince was not as handsome as the mermaid, but Emily was amazed by everything on land. When she saw humans, her brain automatically deified them. It had its own filter. Maybe it wasn't a filter. She had seen many handsome and good-looking mermaids in the sea. When she suddenly saw an average-looking human, she felt quite different. The different fireworks exploded in the little princess's heart. The queen suddenly said, I've already chosen a lot of males for you. You can choose and see. Those you choose will be together and love each other. The queen asked her subordinates to call the males up. While her daughters were here, they began to pair up so that they could contribute to the population of the mermaid tribe. Ning Shu, it was the first time he had such an experience, choosing a man. Ning Shu also felt novel. It felt like an ancient concubine selection. But these selected male mermaids were not ashamed at all. There was only a strong joy. It was a good thing to be chosen by the beautiful princesses and have little mermaids with them. Soon, a group of male mermaids filed out, wagging their tails. The color of each fish's tail was unique. It was as gorgeous as a gem. There were dark blue, light blue, black, and silver. There were also colorful ones. In the water, there were no external conditions such as money or cars. Choosing a mate was completely based on feelings. Ning Shu glanced at the male mermaids one by one. As soon as the male mermaids met Ning Shu's eyes, they immediately smiled brightly, hoping to attract Ning Shu's attention. After looking around, Ning Shu felt that everyone was good-looking. If there was an ugly one now, it would be unique. The sisters whispered to each other and discussed. Obviously, they all had their own favorites. Which one does Emily like? One of the sisters asked Ning Shu. Obviously, she wanted to wait for Ning Shu to finish choosing before choosing. As the youngest and most doted princess in the family, the elders and sisters were really good to her. Maybe it was because of the beauty that was so easily available that she began to pursue other feelings. Ning Shu said, "Sisters, you choose first. I don't like anyone." Chapter 29:50. The sisters began to choose, and after spending some time with the mermaids, or after giving birth to a little mermaid, they could separate and rebuild their relationship. This was all to reproduce as much as possible. The mermaid race had always been in a negative population growth trend. It was not easy to give birth to children, and with the hunting of humans, the number of mermaids had decreased. Each sister chose one, and from the choice of partners, one could see the beauty of these sisters. Some pursued the beauty of the scales, some pursued the lush hair, and some liked the sturdiness of the body. Some liked handsome faces. Ning Shu did not find a partner. If she did, they would be lovey-dovey and make little mermaids together. In a few days, the prince would pass by this sea of fish. She had to do something, and it was inconvenient to have a mermaid following behind her. She could not let the other mermaids see her kill the prince. After all, she was a kind and pure little mermaid princess. And if the other mermaids knew, they would inevitably be terrified. Killing the human prince would definitely attract the revenge of the humans. At that time, she would become the target of public criticism. So, bad things had to be done secretly. "Queen, I want to be with Princess Emily." A mermaid with a dark blue fishtail stepped out and said to the queen. Ning Shu was checking the meridians in her body. The human body was different from the mermaid body, and she mainly wanted to see if there was a dantian. If there was no dantian, there was no way to store energy. Hearing that someone wanted to be with her, she raised her hand and glanced at the male. She did not pay much attention to him, so Ning Shu looked at him again. His face was a little familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen him before. She should not be familiar with any mermaids. He looked familiar, probably because his facial features were softer, not as strong and handsome as the other mermaids. Male mermaids were European-style handsome, and their facial features were well defined. However, this male mermaid gave off a different feeling. His temperament was good, and his fishtail was dark blue. The reflection of the light was like a sapphire. In the deep sea, this color was the most suitable for mermaids. Even so, Ning Shu still refused. "No, I am still young, and I don't want to find a partner." "Little princess, if you don't want to find a partner, I can play with you until you want to find one," the male mermaid said. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes and looked at him. He looked at Ning Shu openly and blinked his eyes. It was a little electrifying. The queen smiled and said, "Then you can play with the little princess and take good care of her." Ning Shu was speechless. Wasn't she afraid that something would happen if she handed her over to a male so easily? It felt like Her Majesty Queen was hoping for something to happen. The matter was settled. Ning Shu could not refuse, and today's dinner was over. The sisters held their partners' hands and went off to play. God knows what they were doing. The queen smiled and told her daughters to pay attention to their safety and not go to the sea. They could only go to the reef when it was foggy. The fog affected the vision of other creatures, especially humans. Whenever they heard the mermaids sing, it was in foggy weather. It was already terrible to get lost. Now that they heard the mermaids sing, it was even more frightening. "Emily, go out and play with him." The queen touched Ning Shu's head and rubbed her hair. "Your Highness, please." The male mermaid made a gesture of invitation. Ning Shu had no choice but to shake her tail out of the coral palace. "Okay, you can go. You don't have to follow me." She wanted to go back to cultivate and sleep. Moreover, at the bottom of the sea, she could not absorb spiritual energy or the power of the sun. She could not absorb the power of the sun because mermaids lived in the water. Water and fire restrained each other, making it impossible for her to live well in the water. She could either absorb spiritual energy, the essence of the sun and moon, or the power of the stars. In order to absorb these things, Ning Shu had to float to the surface and absorb them. It was inconvenient to have a person following behind her. What she wanted to do was not suitable for the other mermaids to be suspicious. "I will protect you. You don't have to care about me." The man said, "My name is Lon." "Oh, Lon, I'm going to sleep." "You can go." Ning Shu returned to the coral palace. Her bed was a huge clam that could open and close. It was very sturdy and could protect the sleeping mermaid. The little princess doesn't like people following her. Is she too antisocial, or do you want to do something? Lon asked. What can I do? Ning Shu looked at him. This Lon had a dark blue tail and blue hair. It was as if he had fallen into a blue dye vat. Previously, she had completely misjudged his temperament. Ning Shu looked at him. The more I look at you, the more familiar you look. I must have seen you somewhere. Ning Shu searched in her heart, searching for a face she had seen before. Which face could match with this face? Of course you have seen me. I would swim in front of the princess when I had nothing to do, but you didn't care. Lon said with a smile. Ning Shu searched the memory of the client, but there was no impression of this person. It was normal for a mermaid to swim in front of them. Who would care? Ning Shu swam into the clam. There was no clam meat inside. The clam was dead. The clam closed, isolating Lon. Lon smiled and swam away. Ning Shu watched Lon swim away from the gap. After a while, she got out of the clam and prepared to swim to the reef to absorb some spiritual energy. The law could be used in this plane, but the suppression was still quite strong. She could use a little bit. After all, this was a world where witches flew everywhere. There were all kinds of strange things. She could still arrange an invisibility boundary. If she didn't sing and was invisible, who could find her? Little princess, where are you going? Ning Shu came out of the clam and swam out of the coral palace. Not long after, she heard Lon's voice behind her. Ning Shu turned to look at him with a blank expression. Didn't you leave? Why did you come back? Could it be that he had been hiding around the coral palace to peep at her? What was wrong with him? Why didn't she feel the strangeness of the water? Lon raised her hand and took out a gem. I found this in the shipwreck. It's for you. The pink gem looks good on you. Ning Shu thought, are you flirting with me? Ning Shu looked at the gem curiously, turning it over and over in her hand. How do you know this is a gem? Humans call this thing a gem. Humans are crazy about it. Lon said. Ning Shu asked, you have seen and talked to humans before. Did they tell you this is a gem? When a mermaid saw a human, it was as if she saw the world and ran away quickly. Chapter 29:51. Even the mermaids didn't know that this thing was called a gem. What else can a shiny thing be called if not a gem? Lon looked at Ning Shu. Do you like it? Ning Shu, useless thing, I don't like it. Even if I wanted to use it as a decoration, I couldn't. There were no strings, no holes in the gem, it couldn't be worn on the body, and it took up space in the hand. It wasn't practical at all. Ning Shu looked at Lon, the weird mermaid. The more I look at you, the more familiar you look. We must have met before. Ning Shu rubbed his chin, unable to get rid of the familiar feeling. Lon smiled and said, are you going to the surface? Ning Shu nodded hesitantly. Lon said, I'll take you to a place that's safer and has reefs that will let you sing loudly. Lon led the way in front, and Ning Shu looked at his back, swinging her fishtail, her body meandering. Ning Shu suddenly clapped her hands, and her eyes lit up. She finally remembered who this Lon looked like. The main thing was that the waist-length blue hair was too eye-catching, making his facial features less prominent. He looked very much like the sleeping giant. The giant had black hair, and this mermaid was blue, with a naked upper body and a fishtail lower body. It was really hard to connect the two together. They looked so alike. Little princess. Lan En saw that Ning Shu didn't keep up and stopped to look at her. Aren't you going? Ning Shu swung her fishtail and caught up with Lan En, her eyes kept glancing at his face. You don't seem to look like us. How am I different? Lan En asked, squinting to hide the emotions in his eyes. We're all mermaids, what's different? You're different, you look different. Lan En's appearance was more oriental, with a sharp nose and straight eyebrows. He was a handsome man, but the other mermaids didn't have this kind of feeling. Lan En was a reserved beauty, while the other male mermaids were handsome in a sharp and threatening way. Anyway, this Lan En was quite in line with Ning Shu's aesthetic. The two fish swam in the sea and soon arrived at a reef. This place was next to a small island, which was relatively desolate. Ning Shu sat on the reef and wiped the water off his face. He basked in the sun and began to absorb the spiritual qi. Fortunately, he had spiritual energy, but the circulation of his meridians wasn't very good. Ning Shu wondered if he should change his cultivation method and use the demonic beast cultivation manual. To a certain extent, mermaids were also considered monsters. It was more suitable for her to cultivate this. Lanin sat beside Ning Shu. The blue scales on his fishtail reflected a bright luster under the sunlight. It was very beautiful. Ning Shu pondered. If that body wasn't senior uncle's, then it was very likely to be Jingqing's. Then this Lan En sitting next to her, who was using his tail to fetch water, could be the official. But just based on his face, how could he arbitrarily determine that he was an official? Moreover, that corpse might not be an official. The most important thing was that the witty and mentally retarded official didn't have such a personality. How could such an arrogant and despicable person do such a thing like picking up gems and fawning over others? When he saw her, he would definitely cackle. I want to suck your soul dry. But this face was choked in Ning Shu's heart. He couldn't help but make all kinds of guesses and investigations. Ning Shu cultivated while asking Lan En, how old are you now? 5 years old. I'm already an adult. Ning Shu tried to abandon human thinking. Mermaids were 5 years old, so they weren't considered young. And in this world, 1 year was very long. Have you been to other sea areas before? Lan En shook his head. No, it's very dangerous to leave the tribe and run around. Ning Shu used his fingers as a comb to comb his hair while looking at Lan En. This was definitely not Jingqing. If Jingqing was like this, then he must have seen a ghost. Ning Shu decided to test him. He released his spiritual power and attacked the spiritual ball in Lan En's sea of consciousness. If it was just an ordinary creature, his spiritual power wouldn't be very strong. But if it was the soul of a giant in the endless depths, then his spiritual power would be very strong. It might even backfire on him and hurt him. Ning Shu released some spiritual power and attacked Lan En's glabella. But the overwhelming spiritual power directly crushed Ning Shu's spiritual power. Ning Shu snorted and almost bled from his 7 orifices. Blood rushed up to his throat. Ning Shu swallowed the blood. The smell of blood would attract fierce sea hunters. He had already tested that the other party's spiritual power was very strong. He definitely wasn't an ordinary person. Lan En tilted his head and looked at Ning Shu. What's wrong with you? You look very unhappy. Ning Shu swallowed the blood. I'm very happy. How can I not be happy? Lan En nodded. As long as you're happy. After cultivating for a while, Ning Shu felt a little uncomfortable. He was attacked by the other party's spiritual power. And he still acted like he didn't know anything, as if nothing had happened. I want to go back. Ning Shu said. Lan En slid down from the reef and stretched out his hand to help Ning Shu. Ning Shu didn't let him help him and jumped directly into the sea, splashing the water high. Ning Shu picked some seaweed to eat. Because his body was a little injured, this kind of seaweed was eaten by mermaids when they were sick. "Are you feeling uncomfortable?" Lan En asked when she saw Ning Shu eating the seaweed. Ning Shu didn't want to pay attention to her. Did she really not know, or was she deliberately pretending not to know? "Ning Shu, I just think this is delicious. I like to eat it." Lan En didn't say anything. He sent Ning Shu back to the Coral Palace and stopped at the door to watch Ning Shu go in. Ning Shu didn't intend to invite him in. Lan En, who stayed at the door for a while, swam away. "Where did you go to play with him? Why didn't you let him in?" The queen looked at Ning Shu's belly, as if there was a mermaid cub inside. Ning Shu smiled slightly. "I just went out to wander for a while. I didn't do anything." "You didn't sing and dance together?" the queen asked. Ning Shu, "No, we talked about the stars and the moon, from poetry to life ideals." Ning Shu said helplessly. Compared to her sisters, the queen paid more attention to her. "You should also care about your sisters, okay? Maybe some of them are already pregnant." Ning Shu said that he was tired and wanted to rest, so as to avoid the queen urging him to have a baby. Maybe the little princess wanted to go to the land because the labor was too strong. It's not that she didn't want to have a baby, but she hadn't met anyone who wanted to have a baby with her. Even if a fish and a human had a child, the child would still be a mermaid, just like a mermaid. There was no difference. Ning Shu had to hurry up and cultivate. She was about to pass by and deal with the prince in one fell swoop. As for Lan En, she would deal with him after the mission was completed. As long as he didn't cause trouble for her mission, Ning Shu chose to ignore him. She was afraid that he would follow her wherever she went. Chapter 2952. Ning Shu's life as a mermaid was still very comfortable. She didn't need to work, and when she had nothing to do, she would swim in the sea, and the food she ate would be delivered to her mouth. A life of drunken stupor. It was the kind of life that he yearned for day and night. Only Lan En would wander around in front of her and give her some small gifts, such as seafood, pearls, gems, gold coins, and the like, which were all found in sunken ships. There were actually a lot of treasures in the sea, and there was an unknown amount of gold and gems in the ships. Buried in the sea, there was no way for humans to salvage them. Ning Shu was suspicious of Lan En, but she didn't show it. When she saw these things, she would put on a fake smile and say that she didn't like it and that she shouldn't give these things in the future. Seeing that Ning Shu didn't like this thing, Lan En would change it to something else next time. Ning Shu still said that she didn't like it. After many times, Lan En also knew that the little princess really regarded money as dung. So she stopped giving things. Occasionally, Ning Shu would swim out of the sea when it was dark and cultivate until dawn. Lan En had always been by Ning Shu's side. Occasionally, she would find something for Ning Shu to eat. Ning Shu couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. Did he really treat her as his partner? Probably not. Because of this face, no matter what Lan En did, Ning Shu could interpret all kinds of strange meanings in her heart. In short, Ning Shu was quite disgusted by this face. Maybe she subconsciously felt that this guy might be the Lord. So when she faced him, she really felt like she had hairs all over her body. That and that were uncomfortable. Ning Shu couldn't help but ask, "Why are you always following me? I don't like people following you. Turn around and leave. Quite unruly. Anyway, I'm an unruly little princess." Lan En said, "The queen is by your side to protect you, and we should be considered partners." That's your wishful thinking. Every time she faced Lan En, who didn't look like the Lord at all, Ning Shu began to deny it in her heart. In short, she kept denying, confirming, and denying. Maybe that corpse wasn't the Lord at all, but someone else. He was so conflicted. The weather began to change. As creatures that lived in the ocean, they were generally familiar with the changes in the ocean. In this kind of weather, it was most likely going to rain. With heavy rain, the ocean would be turbulent. A storm was created. Every time this happened, the queen would order all the mermaids to stay in the deep sea. If they swam to the shallow sea, it was very likely that they would be swept to other places by the waves. It was very likely that they would be swept onto land. This was fatal to the mermaids. Not only would they suffer, but they would also implicate the entire race, causing humans to flock to the mermaids. Ever since mermaids were discovered by humans, many people specialized in catching mermaids and even used various methods to lure them from the sea. Many mermaids were captured by humans because of this. The change in weather caused all the mermaids to gather around the coral palace. The queen kept a close eye on Ning Shu. She had Ning Shu sit beside her and wait for the storm to end. Every time he saw the queen like this, Ning Shu felt that he was the queen's biological son and that the others were picked up from the streets. Why wasn't he looking at her sisters? Why was he staring at her? Lan En sat not far away, looking at Ning Shu when he had nothing to do. Ning Shu lowered his head and played with his fingers, thinking, if I don't save him, will the prince die? But Ning Shu wasn't sure. At this time, he had to see that Prince Hickle drown. Otherwise, he wouldn't be at ease. But the queen was staring at him and definitely wouldn't let him go. He had to find a reason to leave. Mother, I want to sleep in the mussel, Ning Shu said to the queen. The queen only thought that Ning Shu was afraid, so she told him not to come out of the mussel. Ning Shu slept in the mussel, a little far from the queen. He made an invisibility barrier and ran away, then quickly swam towards the surface of the sea. At this moment, the sea was turbulent, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. The rain was very heavy, and a ship was helplessly bobbing up and down with the waves, as if it would sink at any time. The weather was gloomy, and the dark clouds were heavy. It was as if one could reach out and touch it. The usually blue sea was now incomparably black, as if it was the mouth of a monster that could swallow everything at any time. Ning Shu sensed the location of the ship and swam over. Little princess. Lan En's voice sounded behind him. Ning Shu turned around stiffly and saw Lan En. Really, I have you everywhere. Will you die if you don't follow me? Will you die? What are you doing? Why are you following me? Ning Shu asked. At the same time, he made a decision. Little princess, what are you doing? The stormy weather is too dangerous. I'll go with you, Lan En said. Ning Shu refused. No, I'm just going to walk around. How did this guy discover that she had run away? When she ran, she was invisible. How did this guy discover her? The sea was turbulent, each wave higher than the last. The people on the ship panicked and ran around the deck. Their screams and shouts were drowned out by the sound of the waves. Ning Shu popped his head out. His snow-white skin looked a little gloomy and scary in the black sea, like a ghost. Lan En narrowed his eyes and looked at the panicked people on the ship. Little princess, are you a curious human? Ning Shu ignored him. When he saw a wave coming, he quickly sank into the water. A huge wave made the overloaded ship finally sink. The people on the ship were either forced to fall into the water or jumped into the water in panic. Ning Shu released his spiritual power and searched for the prince. Silk was wearing an expensive prince's outfit and had a sword at his waist. He was struggling in the water. Ning Shu swam over, intending to pull this guy into the deep sea. In order to avoid being seen, Ning Shu even turned invisible. He reached out and grabbed Silk's leg and pulled him down. Silk felt something pulling his leg. He saw a blue mermaid swimming towards him. The beautiful color was really unforgettable. The mermaid grabbed his hand and pulled him up. But there was something under his feet that didn't let him float up. He couldn't breathe. His lungs were struggling. He couldn't help but open his mouth to breathe, but bubbles came out. It was very uncomfortable to choke on water. He felt like he was going to die. Before he died, he saw a beautiful mermaid. He was so beautiful. His scales were so beautiful. He had never seen such scales. They were more dazzling than gems. He liked them so much. He wanted to have them. Ning Shu was stunned and shouted at Lan En, "What are you doing?" Lan En said, "Princess, you don't need to save him. I'll save him. Also, Princess, humans can't live in the water. If you pull him down like this, he'll die." Ning Shu was speechless. "Which fucking eye of yours saw that I was going to save him? My premonition came true. This guy is really a shit stirrer." Chapter 2953. Ning Shu said, "I want to eat." "Princess, this human can't do it anymore. He must be allowed to breathe," Lan said as he dragged the prince to the surface of the sea. Ning Shu grabbed the prince's leg and didn't let go, but Lan actually dragged both Ning Shu and the prince away. Ning Shu swung his fishtail and retreated. At the same time, the prince kept kicking his leg, trying to kick something off. He was very strong, and the prince wasn't weak. Damn, the prince's martial arts weren't weak. It was all focused on the love between the prince and the princess, but in reality, the prince wasn't weak. Otherwise, how could he be a hero saving a beauty, defeating a dragon, defeating a witch, crossing mountains and rivers to find the princess? With this kind of strength, the prince was almost the strongest kind of person in fairy tales. Ning Shu grabbed him tightly. He wanted to use vines to wrap around the struggling prince, but Lan was here. He couldn't let Lan see him use his superpower. Pulling the prince like this for a while, Hickle's face turned blue and he was about to drown. Compared to the prince's torture of the client, tearing off her scales one by one and whipping her to make Emily cry. He also violated Emily, which was really painful. Drowning him was already letting him off easy. Moreover, the prince saw Lan. When he went back, he would definitely increase his efforts to capture mermaids. Even if it was for the race, he couldn't let this guy live. "Damn, this retard." Lan said, "I know you are kind, little princess, but bringing him to the Coral Palace like this will definitely kill him. He will die before he reaches the Coral Palace. Listen to me, this isn't how you save people. Ning Shu, I bought a watch last year. Tormenting her mission, don't blame me for shooting you in the back. I'll report you." Lan was very strong. He dragged the two of them and swam up. Ning Shu immediately set up a barrier so that Lan couldn't swim to the surface of the sea. The prince couldn't breathe and would definitely drown. However, Lan En easily destroyed Ning Shu's enchantment and brought the prince out of the sea. The prince's lung capacity was very large. During the time he was struggling in the sea, he did not faint. As soon as he came out of the sea, he started coughing violently. Ning Shu directly swept his tail at Lan En, wanting to snatch the prince from Lan En's hands. "Your sister." Was the plot so irreversible? Could it be that Lan had actually fallen in love with the prince, so he was wholeheartedly trying to save the prince? She must have entered some kind of fantasy again. "Give him to me." He tried to snatch the prince, but Lan quickly sent the prince to the shore. "Princess, don't be stubborn. I'll be back soon. Leave this to me." Ning Shu took a deep breath. She was so angry that her chest was heaving up and down. She wagged her tail and chased after him at an extremely fast speed. Not only did she want to kill the prince, she also wanted Lan En to die in a very rhythmic manner. If the prince escaped, things would become much more troublesome. Lan En, this bastard, was deliberately going against her. Lan En sped up and swung his arm, throwing the prince onto the shore. Plop! The prince smashed onto the beach and fainted. Ning Shu quickly swam ashore, wanting to drag the prince into the water again. She was very persistent. "Princess, he's already on the shore. Don't worry about him. Let's go quickly. Someone will find him soon." Lan En pulled Ning Shu. Ning Shu directly punched him in the face and swam towards the beach. However, a fishtail couldn't walk. In addition, there were fishermen coming this way and found the prince. "There's someone here. Hurry and save him." The fishermen dragged the prince away in the rain. Ning Shu wiped the rain on her face, cursing in her heart. Lan En looked at Ning Shu. His hair was wet, strand by strand. Water stains flowed down his face, and his lower body was bare. It was indescribably seductive. At this moment, he had a smile on his face and said, "Sabi, are you dumbfounded?" He knew the way this woman did missions too well. Simple and crude, straightforward. Once she fixed her eyes on someone, it was definitely related to the mission. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes. "You're doing it on purpose." "Yes, I'm doing it on purpose." "Are you dumbfounded?" "Surprise," Lan En said. Ning Shu smiled. "Look behind you." Lan En turned her head and saw the Grand Elder floating above the sea. Lan En's pupils constricted, and she turned to look at Ning Shu. Ning Shu said, "Sabi, are you dumbfounded? I've already reported you, Jingqing." Unbeknownst to them, the storm had stopped and the sea had calmed down. Lan En's eyes darted around. She supported her head with her fingers and tilted her head. "What should I do?" He hid in the water because the water could isolate some auras and information. However, he didn't expect this woman to enter this world. Suddenly, he wasn't so bored anymore. He wanted to tease her before he left. He couldn't stay in any world for too long. The longer he stayed, the more information he left behind, and the easier it was to be discovered. However, this woman's soul had become stronger again, which surprised him a little. In that state, it was easy for her soul to dissipate. When he saw her again, she was alive and kicking. "See you in the future." The Grand Elder walked over. Jingqing pursed her lips and took off her skin. The mermaid's skin instantly lost its vitality and sank to the bottom of the sea. This mermaid named Lan En was already dead. It was unknown if he died of natural causes or if Jingqing swallowed his soul and took away his body. What a sinful son of a bitch. Jingqing's soul looked the same as the giant, but it was the normal height of a human. Although he looked okay, he took away the prince. Ning Shu was now so angry that he gritted his teeth. Jingqing's soul wasn't very strong, about the same as hers. After taking away so many soul stones and soul fluid, his soul was still so weak. Jingqing didn't panic when he saw the Grand Elder. Instead, he was happy to see his family. He opened his arms and rushed to the Grand Elder, hugging him tightly. "Grand Elder, I missed you so much." They looked like brothers who were deeply in love with each other. Ning Shu opened his mouth slightly and quickly lowered his body. This scene was completely out of Ning Shu's expectations. She had thought that it would be a tense situation, but it turned out to be so tender. "Grand Elder, why are you only here now?" Jingqing hugged the Grand Elder tightly and cried. The Grand Elder was held by Jingqing expressionlessly and was about to grab him. "Lan En, no," Jingqing held the Grand Elder's head with both hands and kissed him. He kissed him directly. The Grand Uncle was immobilized. Jingqing used a little trick to immobilize the Grand Uncle. Seizing the opportunity, Jingqing escaped. In the next second, the Grand Elder's body could move. He wiped his mouth with a disgusted expression and chased after Jingqing. Cough, cough. Ning Shu popped his head out of the water and spat out the water in his mouth. He was so surprised that he choked on the water. Chapter 2954. If she saw this scene, would she be silenced? Damn, Jing Qin was even more shameless than she had imagined. He kissed the person who came to catch him and then took the opportunity to escape. If he had run away immediately, he might have been caught very quickly. Doing so would have allowed him to escape. This wave of manipulation was as fierce as a tiger. The Grand Elder's expression was as disgusted as if he had eaten shit. Ning Shu calmed his mind. The impact was too great. Fortunately, he had the foresight to hide in the water. He hoped that Jing Qin would be caught and quickly filled in the law of nothingness. Moreover, Ning Shu was very worried about whether he would meet Jing Qin again in the future. Most importantly, she was going to pick up trash in the future. How would she look at him when she saw this embarrassing scene? His mind couldn't help but replay that scene. In order to escape, Jing Qin really could do anything. It was quite miserable to meet such a person. Who knew what he would do? It seemed that Jing Qin, who was locked in the system space, was the most obedient. Out of the system space, Jing Qin seemed to be free. Ning Shu swam to the bottom of the sea and was a little worried when he saw Lanen's body. Logically speaking, the body of a clansman should be brought back to the place where the clan lived. But how could he explain Lanen's sudden death? He touched Lanen's body and found that there was indeed no sign of life. Originally, the queen was going to punish her for coming out of the sea in the storm. Now that Lanen was dead, the clan's impression of her dropped. She was going to be the queen. So Ning Shu dug a hole and buried Lanen. He didn't know when Jing Qin had invaded Lanen's body, but he was indeed dead. The microbes at the bottom of the sea would decompose the bodies of sea creatures. It wouldn't be long before Lanen became a skeleton. Not long after that, even the bones would be gone. After burying Lanen, Ning Shu swam to the clan, cursing Jing Qin in his heart. The prince had returned to land. How could she take revenge on the prince? Could she find an undersea witch? She was mute and her legs hurt as if they were broken. That kind of medicine also wanted her voice. It was a purely inferior product. As soon as Ning Shu returned to the clan, he saw many mermaids looking for him everywhere. Obviously, the queen was worried to death when he was missing. Without her legs, the queen was keeping a close eye on her. How was she going to get to land? Ning Shu listlessly accepted the queen's reprimand. He had no energy at all. If it wasn't for that bastard Jing Qin, the mission would have been half completed. In the end, there was no progress at all. Why was Jing Qin so annoying? The queen looked at Ning Shu's ashamed appearance and didn't want to lecture her anymore. She told her to be obedient and not run around for no reason. She then asked where Lanen went. Ning Shu looked confused. I didn't see Lanen on the way back. Sigh, he probably went to look for you and hasn't returned yet. Look at how good Lanen is to you. The queen began to chatter incessantly again. Ning Shu just listened and didn't say anything. She had to find a way to get ashore and solve the prince's problem as quickly as possible. Originally, if the prince died in the sea, everything would be over. But once he reached the shore, he would be in human territory, and the difficulty of completing the mission would increase. Minister Jing Qin. Ning Shu wanted to burn the corpse, so he threw a few fire pearls at it. She didn't know if it could melt the ice crystals on the corpse. She really wanted to destroy the corpse. Ning Shu decided to go to the undersea witch to see if there was any good version of the potion. Ning Shu felt that the witch most likely saw that the little princess was naive and gullible. She gave her the worst potion but took away the little princess's most precious thing. Naive children were easy to trick. And it hurt to walk. While the queen wasn't paying attention, Ning Shu slipped away and went to find the witch. Although she didn't know how a human could actually live on the bottom of the sea. And she could even cook potions on the bottom of the sea. It was too damn unscientific. However, this was a bizarre fairy tale world. Anything could happen. The witch lived a little far from the mermaid group, and she also met some sea hunters on the way. The little princess relied on some kind of faith to cross the dangerous sea, changed the medicine on her throat, and then endured extreme pain to go ashore. It was unimaginable. Unfortunately, the end was tragic. If she quickly turned into foam, it wouldn't be so tragic. But she had to endure so much pain and torture in the middle. Arriving at a house made of seaweed, Ning Shu knocked on the wooden door. This door should have been found on the sunken ship. The door creaked open, and an old and hoarse voice came out. "Come in." Ning Shu walked into the cramped room. The room was filled with strange things. There was a big pot of something bubbling. He didn't know what it was, but it was black in color. This kind of thing really didn't have the appetite to swallow. The witch was a short and old woman with a long nose. She wore a hat on her head and looked at Ning Shu with her cloudy eyes. "Why did the little mermaid princess come here? Aren't you afraid of losing your life?" Ning Shu said, "I want a pair of legs, painless, without any side effects." The witch chuckled. Her laughter was like sandpaper rubbing against a wall, making goosebumps all over. "There will be a punishment for a mermaid turning into a human. My magic potion is not so easy to get. What can you give me in exchange?" The witch asked, reaching out to touch Ning Shu's face. Her fingernails were sharp. A young and beautiful face, a charming and beautiful voice. Ning Shu asked, "What do you want me to give you in exchange?" "I'll give you pearls, gold coins, and gems. There are many sunken ships at the bottom of the sea, and even good wine. These things are not precious. I don't need them. You have everything I need." Ning Shu asked, "You want my voice?" "I can't speak without a voice. What's the point? My voice is not good." "Then give me your beautiful face. There's always an exchange." Ning Shu asked, "Will your legs hurt after drinking your potion?" "Of course it will hurt. This is your punishment for turning into a human." Ning Shu curled his lips. "Forget it. Turning into a human is so painful, so miserable. Is there a potion with a time limit? After a while, I'll turn back into a fishtail again. I won't become a human permanently." "No. Then is there a prosthetic leg?" "I'll use a prosthetic leg." At this time, they were all wearing big puffy skirts that spread very wide. God knows what kind of legs were under the skirt. This kind of dress emphasized the slim waist, tightening the waist and highlighting the small waist. As for the thighs and whatnot, they were under the puffy skirt. The skirt even covered the shoes. Prosthetic legs were also possible. She just needed to practice more. The witch said, "No." "Then why don't you have anything?" Ning Shu said, somewhat puzzled. "It's too dangerous to take it orally. Is there any way to make me look like a human?" She did not need to suffer the pain of walking with needles. She was here to do a mission, not to suffer. Chapter 2955. Moreover, this potion would forcibly turn a mermaid into a human, and she would never be a mermaid again. One way was to kill the prince with a dagger and pour his blood on her legs, but this plan failed. Even if there was a way, Ning Shu was not willing, because the side effect was that her legs hurt when she walked, just like being tortured. She would not be able to do the task happily. If she did not pour the blood on her legs, she would only turn into bubbles. She was a mermaid who was going to become a queen. The witch said, "Only the potion can turn your fishtail into legs. Only with legs can you be considered a human. A monkey still has 2 legs." Ning Shu said lightly. She did not want to be in so much pain to do the task, and if she became a human, she would be punished by God. Well, it could be considered as God's punishment. The setting that would turn her into bubbles was really deceptive. It was painful and she was going to die. If she could not get the prince's love, she would turn into bubbles. God damn the prince's love. Ning Shu felt that she could not find a breakthrough from the witch, so she had to find a way to leave directly. The witch really liked the mermaid's voice, which was not as old and rough as hers. She took out a piece of contract paper and said, "In exchange for your voice, I will turn you into a human, a real human. So that you can follow your lover." "I can't even speak, how can my lover know what kind of person I am?" Ning Shu asked. "I don't know human language, do you want me to be caught blind? Then give me your face." The witch took a deep breath and said, not arguing with a child. Ning Shu was even more speechless. "If I use a face without facial features to meet my lover, he will be so scared that he will pull out his sword and stab me to death." The witch was also angry. "Then what do you want in exchange?" "After thinking about it, I don't seem to have anything to exchange." "Forget it, I will just be a happy little mermaid." Ning Shu leisurely swam away, and the witch was so angry that her big nose was crooked. Ning Shu swam back to the tribe. He thought to himself that it was impossible to go in the direction of the witches, so he could only rely on himself now. Ning Shu looked at his own tail and stretched out a vine to wrap around the tail. He used the vine to form a foot and then made a leg at the side. Of course, the leg beside him was very thin. It was good enough that it could support his balance. Ning Shu wanted to move, but his tail instinctively wanted to wag, so Ning Shu fell to the ground with a plop. Ning Shu concentrated and controlled the vines to walk. Perhaps it was because they were in the water, so walking was not smooth. Ning Shu put away the vines and prepared to go to the sunken ship to find human clothes. Not long ago, Prince Hickle's ship had sunk. There must have been women's clothes on it. After all, there was a party on the ship. The little mermaid peeped at the human party and saw the prince. She followed the ship and saved the prince. Ning Shu floated to the sunken ship and swam around, looking for suitable clothes. Women's dresses. He found a lot of boxes in the ship. The boxes were full of women's clothes, but they were soaked in the sea. At the same time, there were gold coins and gems on the ship. Ning Shu collected some. Living in human territory, eating, drinking, and doing everything required money. The little beauty did not take anything and rushed ashore. Ning Shu collected some clothes that were about his size. They were too big or too small to wear. He carried half a box of gold coins and gems and swam back to the coral palace. The queen saw Ning Shu carrying large and small bags of human things and was particularly worried. She said, "Emily, human things are not good for us mermaids. Clothes will slow me down and make it easy for other creatures in the deep sea to catch me. Clothes would become more cumbersome in water, increasing resistance and greatly reducing speed. It would be easy for other sea creatures to kill them. It was also dangerous for mermaids to live in the sea." His little daughter was so curious about human things. This was not a good sign. And it was a very dangerous sign. Mermaids could not survive on land. There were dangerous humans who were eyeing mermaids covetously. Ning Shu said, "Mother, don't worry, I won't wear human clothes. I'm just looking, I won't wear them." The queen's expression was very serious. "Throw them away. Some things are more fascinating the more you look." It was not that there were no mermaids who were interested in humans, but they all ended up miserable. Humans would not be kind to them. Ning Shu, he did not expect the queen's reaction to be so big. What to do? He could only act coquettishly and promise that he would not wear these things out of the coral palace. Ning Shu promised again and again, but did not swear to God. She was afraid. The queen had no choice but to let her subordinates pay more attention to the seventh princess and not let her mess around. "By the way, where is Lainin? I haven't seen Lainin for a while. Did Lainin come to you?" The queen always felt that something was missing. She suddenly remembered that she had not seen Lainin for a while. In the past, Lainin was always by Emily's side, but now he was not wandering around. "Did you see him?" The queen's expression was a bit heavy. Did something happen, or was he killed by hunters in the ocean? Occasionally, mermaids who swam far away were either killed by hunters or captured by humans. Ning Shu shook his head, indicating that he did not know. The queen was worried. Ning Shu returned to his sleeping place, rummaged through the clothes, looking for something suitable for his body. He barely found a piece to put on. The fluffy skirt was really wet. The place below the waist was very wide. Ning Shu used vines as he previously imagined. The skirt was long and thick, and he could not see the legs. It was particularly taxing on mental power. After all, he had to walk naturally like a human. It was not good to practice in the water. Ning Shu planned to go invisible and practice on the beach. He chose to practice on the beach at night. Ning Shu knew that the queen sent people to watch him. He became invisible and swam to the shallow sea with his clothes. Then he put on the clothes, evaporated the water, and began to practice walking. The feeling in the water was completely different from on land. He had to keep his mental power focused at all times. If he did not concentrate, it was very likely that he would fall. If he did not pay attention and fell, the situation under his skirt would be peeped. This task must be done quickly. The longer he stayed on land, the easier it was to be exposed. And after killing the prince, he had to return to the ocean as quickly as possible. When he felt that he had practiced enough, Ning Shu began to leave the ocean. Before he left, he had to prepare his homework. The shortest way to the prince's country, how to successfully enter the castle. Of course, he could not be like the previous little princess who wandered in front of the castle and was caught by the guards in front of the prince. This time, he had to have a reasonable identity to enter the castle. Ning Shu calculated in her mind. On a sunny day, she left the ocean with some gold coins and went ashore. Chapter 2956. Ning Shu relied on her spiritual power to control the vines and make herself walk with the swaying of her skirt as if she was walking with two real legs. She wanted to take a carriage, but only nobles could afford a carriage, especially a luxurious carriage, which was a means of transportation in the city. Going to further places, especially the mountain roads and forests, was not suitable for a carriage. Ning Shu had to cross the mountains, and the carriage was useless. Don't let her carry the horse when the time comes. The animals in the fairy tale world are quite lively. Except for the fact that they can't speak, some animals are even protagonists. Ning Shu walked in the forest, and some small animals looked at Ning Shu and chirped as if they were talking. It's really tiring to wear this fluffy skirt. The place below the waist is very fluffy, and the inside is made to make the skirt fluffy. It's the waist that is uncomfortable, all kinds of belts, and when the abdomen is tightened, it feels like the intestines are about to explode. It's the same principle as modern corsets. Being a mermaid is still a happy thing. Crossing the mountains, crossing the river, from the other side of the sea, the other side of the mountain towards the city. And there are still wars in some places. There are many kingdoms in the fairy tale world. Behind the romantic love story of the princess and prince, there is invasion and war between countries. Therefore, in order to avoid the war-torn places, Ning Shu has to take a detour to avoid being caught by the soldiers and discovering the identity of a mermaid. It's not that she can't beat them, but she doesn't want trouble. If she is discovered, the news will spread quickly and affect her mission. She won't expose her body unless it's a last resort. Once her identity is exposed, it's time for a big fight. Ouch! Ning Shu felt that she stepped on something and quickly stepped aside. She saw a thumb-sized girl on the ground. At the moment, Ning Shu stepped on her and she was dizzy. So small. She didn't accidentally meet Thumbelina, who is constantly being robbed and running away from marriage, right? This Thumbelina grew out of a tulip bud and is a bit similar to Liren. She was snatched away by a toad to be his son's wife. She was taken away by a scarab, who despised her for not being pretty and threw her away. After that, she was saved by a field mouse. She saved a swallow. The swallow brought her to the flower elf prince and they lived happily together. Of course, a white butterfly was sacrificed along the way. Ning Shu didn't want to bring Thumbelina along, so he gave her a fruit as an apology. When Thumbelina saw Ning Shu, her eyes were full of pleading. Apparently, she wanted Ning Shu to take her away. Ning Shu gulped down a mouthful of chicken soup. Do your best. Your happiness is right in front of you. You can do it because you are the youngest. Then he left without looking back. Compared to the client's hardships, Thumbelina's marriage was bumpy. What she met before was not an ugly toad, but a scarab with a different aesthetic, followed by a rich mole, and finally the flower elf prince. But in the end, the flower elf prince and princess lived happily together. Thumbelina could not catch up with Ning Shu. She could only watch as Ning Shu disappeared into the woods. Thumbelina had to exert a lot of strength to move the tree. After a period of time, he could finally see the city. Ning Shu soaked his clothes and hair in the stream, washing the dirt off his body. After he got ashore, he evaporated the water from his clothes and hair. He walked into the city refreshingly. The gate was guarded by guards. It didn't look very strict, but the castle was heavily guarded. There were several guards at each gate, and each guard had an eagle perched on their shoulder. The eagle's sharp eyes stared at Ning Shu. Ning Shu wanted to enter the castle while invisible, but because of the eagle, he was caught even if he was invisible. This kind of eagle had the ability to see through all invisibility. It was made to prevent witches. This was a world where witches rode brooms and flew all over the sky. Moreover, most of the witches' images were evil. For no reason, they would curse people, turn people into animals, or use some kind of spell to harm people invisibly. Many princesses and princes had suffered. Not to mention the princesses, even the king had suffered. In order to prevent his castle from being invaded by witches, it was necessary to make some preparations. Ning Shu did not want to be caught as a witch. More importantly, if she was caught, her identity would be exposed. Even if she wanted to kill Prince Hickle, she could not let people know that it was a mermaid who did it. Otherwise, she would be retaliated. Not every mermaid could endure the revenge of humans. She would take responsibility for her own actions. It was better to be sneaky. Ning Shu wandered around and found that the castle was recruiting maids. Ning Shu queued up to sign up. In order to ensure that she could enter the palace, Ning Shu even gave the guard some money as a bribe. The guard had an "I know" expression. You're also here for the handsome prince, right? Ning Shu, congratulations, you guessed right. I'm here for the handsome prince. They're all over there, hee. The guard pointed to the crowd. Although they were here to become maids, many of the girls were dressed gorgeously. They wore wide hats with delicate flowers on them. Although the prince was now married to the princess of the neighboring country, it did not mean that the prince could not have other women. 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. As long as one was a noble with assets, they had such rights. Although there was only one queen or consort, one could have many beauties. You're dressed nicely now. When the time comes, you won't be wearing the same uniform. The guard shook his head. When Ning Shu heard the uniform, she was a little depressed. She did not know what the maid uniform was like. She hoped that her legs would not be exposed. Why was it so difficult to be a human? Because of Ning Shu's bribery, she successfully entered the palace. Of course, there was still a round of selection. Usually, it was the head butler who was in charge of all the affairs in the palace. Because of her face, Ning Shu was selected. She was chosen to be good-looking. To some extent, the maid was also a woman who was chosen for the master of the palace. Not only did she have to work, but she also had to be worked. The maid uniform was a long skirt, but it was not so big. After all, if it was too big, it would not be easy to do things. However, if the hem was not puffy, it would not look good. When no one was around, Ning Shu went to the room and put on the maid uniform. She tied a bow on the back. Fortunately, the current maid uniform had not developed into that kind of maid uniform. Otherwise, her legs would be exposed. Maids had to do a lot of things every day. It was not easy for a maid like Ning Shu to see the prince. To do rough work, some girls would use tricks to see the prince. Even if they could not see the prince, it was still good to see the king. Even if they could not see the king or the prince, they could still meet a good husband in the palace. In this era, the lives of the commoners were not good. There was famine and war. The nobles wore luxurious clothes and had groups of servants. They lived an exquisite life. /BK Chapter 2957. The commoners didn't have enough to eat, and it was normal for beautiful girls to want to rely on their looks to live a good life. Ning Shu also followed the trend and bribed. The result of the bribe was that he could clean the palace and clean the prince and princess's rooms. Ning Shu was speechless. Even so, it was quite wonderful to be able to get close to the prince quickly. Early in the morning, he had to wait outside the prince's room and wait for the prince to get dressed. He had to empty the spittoon and help the prince put on his clothes and shoes. When the doorbell rang, Ning Shu hurriedly pushed open the door and entered. The prince and princess were sitting on the bed, and the maid who was with Ning Shu walked towards the prince first. Princess Karina looked at the maid with a heavy gaze. Ning Shu had no choice but to serve the princess and give her water to rinse her mouth. Ning Shu looked at the maid's amorous expression and how Prince Hickle looked at the maid with a fiery gaze. Karina had already begun to grind her teeth. Judging from the way she tortured people, this Karina wasn't someone to be trifled with. Moreover, there were a lot of torture devices in this era that made people wish they were dead. There were also witches who could turn you into an ugly monster with a face full of sores. It can torture your body as well as your mind. Apart from the romantic love stories of the prince and princess, this was actually a rather barbaric era. Cinderella's two sisters who wanted to wear crystal shoes were fed to the eagles in the end. They were both punished. Ning Shu seriously served Princess Consort and helped Princess Consort put on her clothes. She also had to use all her strength to pull on the straps so that Princess Consort's waist was very thin. Princess Consort still wanted to use all her strength to pull on it. Don't break the waist. This was the aesthetic standard of this era. If you had a thin waist, even if you had a pair of elephant legs, you would still be beautiful. Elephant legs might even make the waist look thinner and more aesthetically deformed. Especially when there were so many internal organs in the stomach. Ning Shu had dealt with the difficult Princess Consort. On the other side, the prince and the maid were exchanging amorous glances. The princess's expression could be said to be very gloomy, but the prince acted as if he didn't notice. Perhaps he did, but he didn't care. This was the person Emily liked. It was simply intoxicating. Just by looking at him from the boat and then saving him, in a short period of time, Emily would pay a huge price to come ashore. He had originally wanted to coax the mermaid, but he didn't expect that the mermaid would really deliver herself to him. It would be a waste if he didn't want it. Sure enough, not long after, the maid was called over by the Princess Consort and disappeared from the palace. Because Ning Shu served them well, and because of the effect of bribery, Ning Shu could often get close to the prince and princess. Sometimes, the prince would even tease her, touch her small hand, and ask her to pour a cup of tea or something. Then, the way the Princess Consort looked at her changed. After coming to Fairy Tale World, she even experienced a wave of cruel palace fights. Ning Shu did not cross the line at all, but when the Wang Fei was not in front of him, Prince Ning Shu smiled darkly. But the client's face was very beautiful. Even if she was smiling coldly, she looked sweet and cute. When the prince saw Ning Shu's smile, he was a little dazed. Then, he actually followed Ning Shu into the utility room. There was usually no one in the utility room. The prince closed the door and reached out to hug Ning Shu. Ning Shu turned around and hit the prince's nose with her head. The prince groaned and covered his nose. It was so sore that tears came out. You. Before the prince could finish his words, Ning Shu directly threw him to the ground and pressed down on his body. With a thump, the prince was almost out of breath from the pressure. He had never seen a woman so heavy and so fierce. The mainstream aesthetic was still petite and cute, preferably with a thin waist. Ning Shu casually stuffed the prince's mouth with a rag and tied his hands and feet with a rope. At this time, the prince finally felt that something was wrong. He struggled hard and wanted to shout, but his mouth was blocked. And they were in the utility room, so no one would come for a while. Ning Shu dragged him to a corner. This place was blocked by shelves, so no one would notice for a while. It was messy and no one was willing to go inside. The prince tried to intimidate Ning Shu with his eyes, but such eyes were useless against Ning Shu. The prince thought that this beautiful and petite woman should be an assassin. She was wearing a maid's uniform. Could she be a spy from another country? If she wanted to do something to him, she had to get rid of the filthy thing in his mouth. It was too disgusting. Otherwise, how could he talk, how could he call for help, and how could he calm this woman down first? She was a beauty, but why did she become a thief? Up close, this girl was really beautiful. Her lush hair was simply braided, and the braid was casually placed on her chest. It was fluffy and beautiful. The prince calmed down and tried to use his manly charm to make the girl let go of him. He looked at Ning Shu with affectionate eyes. As long as he was saved, he would definitely teach him a lesson. Ning Shu found a set of knives in the storeroom. She placed them in front of the prince, and they shone brightly. The prince's expression directly distorted, staring at Ning Shu in horror. Especially when he saw Ning Shu leisurely brushing his hair behind his ears, it was really indescribably beautiful. But in this case, it was quite inappropriate and horrifying. The prince was covered in cold sweat rolled down his forehead, and his pupils contracted as he looked at Ning Shu. Woo-woo. The prince wanted to speak, but his mouth was blocked. Ning Shu's hand moved around these knives. He picked up the knife and scraped the blade with his finger to test the sharpness. The prince was so scared that he almost peed. He looked at Ning Shu with pleading eyes. As long as he let him go, he would give him anything, including the princess. Now, no matter what, he had to control this witch first. He had never seen such a ferocious woman. Ning Shu stretched out his hand and pinched the acupuncture points on the prince's body, which can make the blood flow slower. He picked up the light knife and released his spiritual force. When he found that no one was around the storeroom, he took off the cloth strip. The prince dared to shout, but his tongue was pulled. His tongue was pulled and he couldn't scream. The prince wept in horror, especially when he saw the knife getting closer and closer to his tongue. His eyes were desperate and helpless. He looked at Ning Shu with eyes full of fear and pleading. Ning Shu raised his hand and cut the prince's tongue directly. Blood splashed. Ning Shu had covered his body with a cloth in advance and the blood splashed on the cloth. The prince's whole body convulsed in pain, but he couldn't scream. Then Ning Shu cut the prince's hand and leg tendons. The prince's eyes rolled over and he fainted. From then on, the prince became a waste who couldn't lift his shoulders or walk. After thinking about it, he simply cut off the third one, leaving his eyes and ears intact so that he could see and hear other people's disdain for him. The prince, who was high in the air, became a joke to others, which was enough to make the prince suffer/BK. Chapter 2958. In order to keep him alive, Ning Shu even wasted some spiritual energy and injected it into his body. Spiritual energy could reduce the bleeding, but things that were missing would not grow back. Also, there were witches in this world. She didn't know if there were witches who had some potion that could restore the prince's body. She felt that it was unlikely. Even if it was possible, the prince would have to pay a price. For a pair of legs, the client lost her voice and became a mute. Walking was like being pricked by needles. But she was forced to dance. Moreover, the prince seemed to have found that the mermaid's feet were very sensitive. If he poked a little harder, she would cry. Every time he wanted the client to drop a pearl, he would play with her feet in every possible way. Ning Shu came out of the utility room with a normal expression and then prepared to run. She bribed the guards with gold coins and said that she wanted to go home to see her mother and would be back soon. Ning Shu gave a lot of money this time. She could drink a lot of good wine and find a girl. The guards agreed and let Ning Shu go. Ning Shu smiled and thanked them, then left their sight in a relaxed manner. Then she quickened her pace. She had to leave here as soon as possible. Before the prince was discovered, she covered him with a clean cloth and put him under the cover with other things. If the cloth was not removed, no one would find him. Unless the prince woke up and called for help, but someone had to go into the utility room. Of course, the prince would not be able to shout. Out of the city gate and into the woods, Ning Shu turned invisible. Perhaps there was some god's spell or tool in this world that could let people know what happened. If she turned invisible, they wouldn't be able to see her. She chose the utility room because there were few people coming and going. There were guards outside the room at all times, and there were eagles hovering in the sky above the castle. If she dealt with the prince outside the room, the eagles would be the first to notice, and the cries would attract the guards. Familiarizing herself with the castle's structure in a low-key way, she set the location as the utility room. If the client's face was beautiful, the prince would definitely hunt for beauties. If the maid was beautiful, the prince would taste her. As for where the maid went after that, or if she was dealt with by the princess, the prince didn't care much. She was not a vicious woman and liked every woman. She had to be good-looking. The invisible Ning Shu crossed the mountains and returned to the ocean. The first thing she did was to take off her maid uniform. He directly buried the maid uniform in the deep sea. After soaking it for a period of time, it would rot. It was hard to guarantee that people wouldn't make the connection if a maid's costume from the palace appeared at the seaside. Witches were like gods in this world. Ning Shu felt much more relaxed after turning back to his fishtail form. He played around in the water for a while before he quickly swam back to his tribe. After disappearing for a period of time, the queen had probably gone crazy from anxiety. It was inevitable that he would be punished. "Emily, you're back. Everyone said that something happened to you. Where have you been? The queen has always been looking for you." When some of the mermaids saw Ning Shu, they immediately swam over and started talking. When the sisters received the news, they immediately rushed over. When they saw Ning Shu, they let out a sigh of relief. "Mother is very angry and sad. You have to apologize." Ning Shu decided to make up a miserable story about the time when she disappeared. This way, not only would she solve the problem of disappearing, but she would also be punished less. Moreover, she went to the land and heard a prince. This kind of thing was too unbelievable. It would only add to the troubles of the other mermaids. When the queen saw Ning Shu, she just snorted coldly. "Why did you come back? Continue to play outside." Ning Shu immediately looked at the queen with pitiful eyes and said that she was swept away by the whirlpool and did not know where she was taken to. When she woke up, she did not know where she was. She was very scared and did not know where her home was. She met a lot of big fish and these big fish wanted to eat her. She could only hide and wait for the big fish to leave before she dared to come out. Then she rushed home. Now she was finally back. The queen was moved. She no longer had the indifference from before. She immediately hugged Ning Shu and called out to him, my son, my sweetheart, you have suffered. So pitiful, so dangerous. I almost couldn't see my sweetheart. Several sisters looked at Ning Shu with tender eyes. Ning Shu nodded cheekily and said, it was really dangerous. I was so scared. Although Ning Shu temporarily avoided punishment, the consequence was that he was restricted from going out. In particular, he could not go far from the Coral Palace. There were people following behind him. In any case, Ning Shu would not go anywhere now. Every day, except for cultivation, he would eat and sleep, sleep and eat. Of course, there was also a mother who was keen on childbirth. Every day, she would bring a row of male mermaids for her to choose from so that she could quickly give birth to a baby and increase the population of the race. Ning Shu was really not in the mood to make a little mermaid. He did not want to have children. Things like giving birth to children should be left to the client. In order to stop people from talking, Ning Shu said that he was thinking about Lan En and that the other males were not interested. When the queen heard Ning Shu's words, she lovingly touched his head. You usually don't like Lan En. Now that Lan En is gone, you miss him. When he was alive, you should have been nicer to him, poor child. Ning Shu pulled the corners of his mouth. How do you know that Lan En is dead? His body was buried in the mud of the deep sea. Did someone dig the grave? You have to be mentally prepared. After such a long time, he either died, lost his way and could not come back, or was eaten by a big fish. Oh. Ning Shu made a sad expression. After that, the queen tried not to touch Ning Shu's sadness and did not bring any male mermaids over for the time being. Not long after Ning Shu left, the prince was found in the utility room. The first to feel that something was wrong was the Princess Karina, because the prince seemed to have disappeared for a while. The princess's first thought was that the prince was with a maid behind her back again. Whenever he saw a pretty maid, his eyes would turn green. He did not even bother to hide it, and those maids pretended to seduce the men. Why couldn't the prince be more loyal? The princess angrily ordered the maids to look for the prince. If she knew which maid it was, she would definitely make the maid suffer a fate worse than death. Everyone in the castle was looking for the prince. In the end, it was a maid who accidentally found the prince covered in blood. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. She screamed and attracted people. The whole castle was in an uproar. The prince was killed in his own home. Although he was not killed, he was insulting the prince. The prince's tongue was cut off, and he could not use his hands and feet. This was a torture used on the untouchables, and someone actually used it on the prince. The prince was still alive, but he couldn't speak, walk, or give birth to children. That was because his manhood had been cut off, /BK. Chapter 2959. The king was shocked and grieved. Who did this to his son? The queen cried even harder. Her son had suffered such a thing. She was distressed and angry. She begged the king to catch the murderer and let the murderer die a horrible death. Wang Fei was dumbfounded. So, the prince had become a cripple now. He couldn't do anything. Could he still be a king in the future? He didn't even have that thing. Was she going to be a widow in the future? She had resented the prince for being a playboy. Now, she had played too big. The princess didn't have any reluctance. She immediately packed her things to go back to her country. She couldn't face a cripple. When she returned to her country, she could remarry in the future. This playboy had disappointed her. Was it worth it to be a widow by his side? The princess wanted to leave when his son was in trouble. This made the old king feel cold and angry. Even if you want to leave, you have to wait until you find the murderer. No, I'm leaving now. It's your son who messes around with women all day. This is God's punishment for him. The union between countries was nothing more than benefits. The king hurriedly looked for a powerful witch. He wanted to restore his son's identity through magic. It would be best if he could find the murderer. Who wanted to torture his son so cruelly? And now the prince had become a joke. Not only were his subjects laughing behind his back, but other countries were also unceremoniously adding insult to injury. They sent letters one after another. Although they were asking about the prince's injury, their tone was full of ridicule and anticipation. The witch was invited to the palace. To be honest, no one liked witches. It was not so much that they were afraid of the witch's power. Especially bad witches. They would use their power to play tricks on people. As a ruler, it was better to destroy such uncontrollable people as soon as possible. The witch checked the prince's body and shook her head. There's no way. The body can't be restored. But you can change it. That's good, then change it. The king said without hesitation. As long as the prince could live well, he would change it. The prince woke up. When he heard the witch's words, he was relieved. He still couldn't accept that his body had become a cripple. And the symbol of a man was gone. That woman was a demon. She was like a delicate flower, but in the blink of an eye, she had turned into a ferocious man-eating flower. He must find that woman and let her suffer hellish pain. However, the prerequisite was that he had to change his body. He was in so much pain. Without his tongue, he couldn't speak at all, and he couldn't exert any strength in his limbs. That woman was so cruel. The king ordered the witches to find the murderer. If they were found, they must be cut into pieces to let them know the cruel laws of the country. No matter how many people died, it wouldn't be enough to hurt the prince. The witch chanted an incantation, and an image appeared in front of her. The image showed what had happened at that time. The misery of the prince was repeated, and the king and the queen were furious, and thus tortured their children. Then, he watched as the woman walked out of the castle and out of the city. In the end, she disappeared without a trace. What's going on? Where are they? The king asked angrily. The prince's eyes bulged out. He wanted to speak, but the root of his tongue was in great pain. It was as if blood was gushing out whenever he moved. Why did this woman suddenly disappear? The witch was also shocked. Because she couldn't be seen, there was no way to track her. She was able to hide and disappear. In the face of the anger of the king's family, the witch found a reason and said, "It's very likely that this is a witch." She changed into the appearance of a young and beautiful woman to deal with the prince. Of course, they knew that she came to deal with the prince. After all, the prince was lying here so miserably. There was no need for you to say the result. The problem was the murderer. Where was the murderer? This witch seems to be very powerful. She hid her figure, and there was no way to track her. Witches are really annoying things. The king cursed. He guessed which country had sent the witch to deal with them. There were many suspects. He felt that every country was a suspect. In order to prevent the king from being implicated, the witch said, "The most important thing now is to find a body for the prince. It's best to find a similar face." The king could only endure the anger in his heart. The most important thing was to change the prince's body. The murderer still had to be wanted. But what should the wanted portrait be? It was said that the appearance was the witch's illusion. If he used this appearance to find the murderer, he wouldn't be able to find her. Perhaps the witch had already turned into a sinister, old, and short woman. Draped in a black robe, this situation was completely different from the one depicted in the portrait. There were so many witches in the world, and witches were all powerful. If he didn't pay attention and offended the narrow-minded witch, she would curse him. In short, it was difficult to catch the murderer. So angry, so sullen. The prince was so angry that his whole body hurt. His wounds hurt even more. He was tortured and ran away. Now he had lost his dignity as a human. In the past, when he saw the maids who looked at him, they would lower their heads and blush. Now they all avoided him. When he needed to solve his physiological needs, he had to accept the strange eyes of others. So humiliating. The princess did not hesitate to return to her country, which made the prince's lungs explode. Everyone was so realistic, especially his princess. She was his princess. She should be with him. Usually, she was always picking on him, but now she ran away. The prince wanted to say, "Father, attack the princess country and annex their country. I want to see the princess regret it and kneel in front of me to beg me." As long as he changed his body, he would have a complete body again. But without a tongue, he couldn't say anything, even if his heart was angry to the extreme. Although the king knew that his son was sad, he didn't know that his heart was like a volcanic eruption. He was busy looking for a body, and it had to be similar to the prince's face. The king also wanted to try his best to find a similar face. He was used to seeing his son's face. If one day another face called him father, even if the soul was his son's, a different face would make him feel like he was cuckolded. Moreover, the change of the prince's face would more or less lead to some side effects. For the stability of the country, the king was also worried and sent out waves of people to find a suitable candidate. "You are a witch. You can guide these people where to look. They can't search without a head," the king said to the witch. The longer his son stayed in this body, the longer he suffered. He had to change his body as soon as possible. /BK Chapter 2960. Being asked to find a suitable body, the witch felt quite helpless. She was particularly unhappy with the king's attitude. This kind of attitude of not only looking at you but also making you work. You are the king, you are amazing. But in the castle, the palace was someone else's territory. People under the eaves had to bow their heads. The witch folded a small paper crane and said to the king, "When the time comes, follow this paper crane. You will probably find a suitable soul." The witch chanted an unknown spell to the paper crane, and the paper crane flew up. Every time the king saw this incomprehensible power, he was very afraid. What kind of existence is the witch? Where does their power come from? Follow the paper crane. The king ordered the guards to follow the paper crane and find a suitable body. During the recent period of his son's accident, the king felt that his old face had been completely lost. A warrior can be killed but not humiliated. The witch tortured people like this and destroyed the symbol of men. Those nobles with titles looked at him strangely. The queen preferred to hold banquets, brightly lit, embroidered clothes, good wine, and delicious food. Everyone hugged and danced together, which made the queen very happy. But because of the accident, the queen was too lazy to hold the banquet. Those gossipy women still didn't know how to talk behind her back about her son. When she heard it, she exploded with anger. The guards were also very helpless. Out of respect for the witch's power, they could only follow the paper crane and hope that they were not played by the witch. If the witch wanted to play with people, there was nothing they could do. The paper crane flew over the mountains and was already some distance away from the king's city. And the more they went, the more desolate it became. Was there really someone living in this place? Finally, they found a man in the forest. This man had golden hair and a tall figure. The most important thing was that he was 70% similar to the prince. He was wearing tattered clothes. At first glance, they could tell that he was from a poor family. The paper crane stopped on the man's shoulder, and the man looked at the guards in surprise. The guards didn't say anything and directly took the man away. The fruit in his arms fell to the ground. "Let me go, where are you taking me?" The man was terrified and was dragged away by the guards. "Of course, we are going to let you enjoy it. You are really lucky to have a face so similar to the prince." From the back, he looked exactly like the prince. Their hair color was similar. The man became even more terrified, but he couldn't resist. The guard pulled the man to the front of the king and let out a sigh of relief. Finally, the mission was completed. Otherwise, she would have to look all over the world for someone who looked like the prince. How long would that take? Moreover, the place where this person lived was so desolate that they wouldn't look for him at all. Even if they wanted to find someone who looked like him, they would go to a place with a lot of people. Witches were both feared and respected. The man was suddenly brought to a dazzling palace. The floor was so shiny that it could reflect one's reflection, and there was a fragrant heat. It was much better than his rundown house. The man was terrified. He knelt on the ground and trembled. The king ordered, "Raise your head." The man raised his head. There was some dirt on his face. The king was disgusted. He ordered the servants to drag him away and wash him. His appearance was too unsightly. Thinking that her son was going to enter this dirty body, she really didn't want to say anything. From the clothes he was wearing, it was obvious that he was a poor commoner and not someone who had been pampered since childhood. His body was definitely not as good as the prince's. The food that he ate must have been dirty and not something that was carefully cooked. It was a pity. If it was a noble's body, it would be better. But the king knew that if he used a noble's body, there would be a lot of trouble. And it was not certain that the nobles would agree. Using a commoner's body was the least troublesome. He would slowly nurture it in the future, and some skills had to be practiced again, such as fencing. His son's strength was not weak. The man was washed clean and brought in front of the king. This time, he could see clearly. He looked quite similar, but his skin was quite rough. At first glance, he could tell that he was a poor commoner. When the prince entered the body, it would be better to take care of him. Soon, he would become his son. His son was now lying like a piece of trash. He was embarrassed, especially when it came to diplomacy between countries. Some people would use this matter to laugh at their country. Now quickly let them exchange bodies. The king anxiously said to the witch. When the man on the ground heard this, he was stunned. He raised his head and saw a person lying on the bed. This person was somewhat similar to him, but his expression was more arrogant. Exchange bodies? Why exchange bodies? Was he going to enter the prince's body? The man's heart was beating rapidly. He did not know whether it was nervousness or fear. He felt that it was inconceivable. He came to a magnificent place and wanted to exchange bodies with the prince. This man did not know what happened to the prince. The witch said some things to pay attention to. Do not let anyone disturb them, and there could not be any mistakes during the process. The king nodded. It was related to his son, so he had to be serious. The prince on the bed was also looking forward to it. Although it was the body of a lowly commoner, it was good to have a complete body. When he had a normal body, it was time to start his journey of revenge. Those who bullied him before and spoke ill of him behind his back were worse. It was too painful to not be able to speak. He was hungry and thirsty, but he could not express his request. The maids and servants' attitude towards him changed 180 degrees. They were full of disdain. Thus, the witch began to chant an obscure incantation and began to exchange the souls of the two people. First, the man's soul had to be taken out to make room for the prince. The man suddenly felt a huge force that was about to absorb him. Then, there was darkness. He did not know anything, as if he had fallen into chaos. His thoughts also stopped. The witch began to take the prince's soul into that body. She was about to start the soul transfer process. But the witch tried several times and found that the prince's soul could not leave his body at all. The witch's face changed. It was the first time she had encountered such a situation. The soul could not leave the body. How could she exchange bodies? If she could not exchange bodies, would she be able to walk out of the palace? Inevitably, the witch's face showed a difficult expression. When the king saw the witch's face, he could not help but want to ask what was going on. But he remembered the witch's previous instructions. He could not disturb the witch. In the deep sea, Ning Shu's heart moved. She felt that someone had begun to move the prince's soul. When she was dealing with the prince, she thought of the witch. The prince turned into a frog, and the frog turned into the prince. It was too casual. She wondered if the witch used magic to integrate the prince's soul into the frog's body. Chapter 2961. As for the kiss turning into a human form, there should be some other reason. In order to let the prince stay with his body for a long time, until the body died, Ning Shu used the soul fixation technique. This method was actually a little mountain method. Some children, or adults, whose souls were weaker, were particularly prone to soul detachment, causing people to fall into a coma and their souls to wander. Using the soul fixation technique, the soul can stay in the body. Like a nail, two pieces of wood are forcibly nailed together, gradually the soul and the body fuse together, and after a long time, the soul will not cause the soul detachment. Now that he felt that someone was moving the soul, Ning Shu was the first to notice it. The witch was really amazing. He hoped that his nail was strong enough. Since she wanted to take the soul away, she didn't want to change the body, right? This kind of trick, the witch's strength was really not weak. Ning Shu thought for a moment, floated up to the surface, bit his finger, formed a seal with both hands, and drew a talisman in the air. Because of the distance, the effect of the talisman should be greatly weakened. But it can also make the nail a little deeper. In the past, if the prince was killed, then he would be killed, but directly killing him was really too easy for him. After collecting more than 10 kinds of mermaid scales, he knew that the prince's hands were stained with the blood of mermaids. After drawing the talisman, Ning Shu sank to the bottom of the sea. If the prince's soul really left the body, then she would have to go ashore again. If the body was changed, then that body was not the prince's. Even if it was done again, it would be someone else's body. The person whose body was replaced, the soul would be destroyed or enter the prince's body. This wave of operation, Ning Shu was convinced. The witch tried several times, but couldn't successfully summon the prince's soul. If the prince's soul didn't come out, then there was no doubt about changing the body. What to do? The witch clenched her eyeballs, thinking of a way to hide things, at least to successfully leave the palace. It was impossible to say that the witches were in awe of the royal family, otherwise, there wouldn't be so many princesses and princes cursed. As time went by, the king's face became more and more ugly. The witch quickly thought of a way, directly put the man's soul back into his own body, and then chanted a spell. The man returned to his body and opened his eyes in a daze. The witch took the lead and said, "You're a prince, right? How do you feel, prince?" Prince? Was she calling him? The man's expression was blank because his soul had just returned to his body and he had yet to adapt to various aspects. The king called out, "Hickle, do you know me?" The witch immediately said, "Your Majesty, the prince's soul has just entered his body, and his thoughts are a bit muddled. You have to give him time to recover. Sometimes there will be symptoms of not remembering things. It's normal. You just need to tell him slowly," the witch said seriously. The king nodded. His son finally had a complete body. He glanced at the body of his son on the bed and asked, "Has that person entered the body?" The witch nodded. The pain that the prince endured has now been borne by someone else. Congratulations to the prince for his rebirth. The man was dumbfounded. How did he become a prince? If he became a prince, would he be able to stay in this magnificent place? Could he lie in a bathtub filled with fragrance? Enjoying everything? The man's heart was filled with fear and anticipation. He was afraid that if he was exposed, he would definitely be punished. But the yearning for a better life overcame the fear in his heart. He trembled and said, "I am a prince." "Your Majesty, you see, he still remembers that he is a prince." Because his body is different, there will always be some discomfort. The witch directly put the prince's hat on the man's head. He was originally a lowly person who could not eat, but now he had become a prince. He was born lowly, but to have such a fate really made the witch sigh. Of course, the witch would not tell anyone about this. If she did, the other witches would laugh at her for not being strong enough. Secondly, the king would definitely not let her go. Once she left the palace, she would leave the country. The witch was free and could go wherever she wanted. When the prince on the bed heard this, he was extremely shocked. He was the prince. How did someone else become the prince? But he could not speak. He could not even open his mouth to scream. His limbs could not move, and he felt a heart-wrenching pain. And he could not move at all. He was the prince. Father, don't be fooled by him. I was the prince. That was an impostor. The witch did not say that she would exchange bodies for them. There was no exchange at all. The prince was extremely desperate. He could not speak and had no way to prove himself. Now he had become the soul of a lowly person. How could this be? The witch was a liar, a liar. The prince shed tears and tried hard to move his body. With a plop, he fell off the bed. This attracted the attention of ordinary people and also interrupted the sentimental conversation between the king and the fake son. The prince looked at his father with teary eyes, trying to convey a complicated message with his eyes, hoping that his father could understand his eyes. The king did not understand. Now the prince's pain and despair were all understood as that lowly person's because he had entered that despairing body. From a complete person to an incomplete person who was not even a man, it was understandable. I can allow you to despair. After all, I am an enlightened king. The prince saw that his father's eyes were incomparably cold. He felt even more desperate. He was the real prince, not the impostor. Father, this was the witch's plot. She found someone to seize our country. The witch from before might be in cahoots with this one. One of them tortured her to this state, while the other pretended to be able to switch bodies and put on a show. I was really deceived. The prince looked at the witch with eyes full of hatred. These lowly slaves, these disgusting witches, should disappear from this world. Father, I am your son. Father. The prince was so sad that he could not control himself. He was especially afraid of what his father would do to him after he became a lowly person. Would his father kill him or throw him out of the palace to fend for himself? He was a noble prince. How could he be like a lowly person, sleeping on the road and being looked at with disgust? So, his tongue was cut off so that he could not speak and could not tell the truth. That lowly impostor had to live a luxurious life in the palace. How could this be? The witch narrowed her eyes and asked the king, Your Majesty, what are you going to do with this person? The king looked at the crying prince and then at the man. For a moment, he did not know what to do. Chapter 2962. In any case, it was his son's body. The king looked at his son and asked, What are you going to do with it? After all, it was his own body. The man didn't know. His mind was muddled, and he couldn't figure out the situation. How did he suddenly become a prince? Instinctively, he felt that the existence of that person was a threat to him, so he said, You can ask her. The person the man pointed to was the witch. It was this woman who made him a prince. Asking her was always the right thing to do. The witch smiled, and her black lips made her look a little gloomy. The prince was furious. Now someone wanted to take over the magpie's nest. A lowly person dared to decide the fate of a prince. The prince's heart was sad. He was originally a prince, but now he had fallen to this point. His family was in front of him, but there was no way to recognize them. Now he believed that the witch made a mess and believed that his soul ran to that person's body. From the beginning to the end, it was a trap. The witch's paper crane would definitely find this person. The prince was terrified. She found someone similar to him to replace her. The prince's imagination was running wild, but now he had to look at the witch to know what the witch would do to him. The witch kicked the ball back to the king. After all, this is the prince's body. It depends on your majesty's decision. Keep it in the palace or throw it out of the palace. It's all up to your majesty. The king was really conflicted, so he called the queen. The queen came in a splendid dress. When she heard about this, she looked at her son, who was a little confused, and then looked at the body on the ground, looking at her with tears in her eyes. The queen couldn't make the decision to throw her son's body out of the palace. The queen couldn't bear it. Her son was born by her, and this body was given to him by her. In short, after discussing it, the final decision was to raise this lowly person in the palace. It was a kind of compensation for the lowly person who gave up his body. Good food and drink. That lowly person probably had never enjoyed such glory and wealth in his life. The prince closed his eyes. He couldn't bear to see his mother holding the impostor and crying. She said with relief that he could talk. His son could talk and walk. From the beginning to the end, it was a scam. Everyone was deceived by the witch. The witch ignored the prince's hateful eyes, but even if he hated her, it was normal. Everyone thought that the prince's hatred was normal. It would be abnormal if he didn't hate her. Prince was carried to a more remote room and was basically raised like a pig. And that man would be groomed as the country's successor. The witch rode away on her broom and left directly. This matter could be considered to have come to an end. Ning Shu was in the deep sea and felt that no one had touched the prince's soul. He wondered how the prince was doing. From a lowly commoner who couldn't even fill his stomach, he was now a prince of a country. It was inevitable that he would cower in fear. Every day, he ate delicious food and had many beautiful maids serving him. He wore beautiful clothes. The false prince was both happy and anxious, especially when he saw his father's discontented expression. The king was indeed a little dissatisfied with his son who had switched bodies. The body was not his son's to begin with, but he seemed to have forgotten all the knowledge and words he had learned in the past. It was understandable that one's body would not be as strong after changing bodies. It could be slowly trained, but the people he knew had all forgotten about it. Could this be the after-effects of exchanging souls? In order to live a luxurious life, the prince had no choice but to study hard and learn all kinds of things in order to become a qualified prince. Occasionally, he would ask about the real prince and visit him. After confirming that the prince couldn't speak and that his tongue had been cut off, the false prince heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, he hadn't entered this body. They had captured him because they wanted his body. Although he didn't know what had happened, he didn't end up in such a miserable state. They were all high and mighty people while he was just a lowly commoner. They didn't care about his wishes at all and just wanted to take over his body. The false prince was very grateful to the witch for making him a prince. His fate would be different from now on. When the real prince saw the luxuriously dressed false prince appear in front of him, he was emotional. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a complete sentence. Moreover, the real prince didn't know how to speak. He was the real prince, but a fake prince was showing off in front of him. The real prince was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. He felt that the heavens were unfair. He was like a piece of trash here. Those maids and servants could openly despise him and call him trash in front of him. Because of his legs, he couldn't even pee or poop himself and needed help from others. At this time, as a proud prince, he wanted to die. The real prince was so wrong that he cried. Because of the fake prince, his parents stopped coming to see him. Why did they treat him so cruelly? Every day of living was a torture, a death by 1,000 cuts. The fake prince took a look, covered his nose, and left. There was a weird smell in the room. It was the smell of urine and feces mixed together. It didn't dissipate in the room. The real prince's face was twisted. No matter what price he had to make those people who hurt him pay. But his body couldn't move at all. He couldn't speak at all. He thought that when his wounds healed, he would be able to write. But he couldn't even hold a pen. His hands were soft and powerless. Since the prince had a new body, then he should find a concubine. Find a concubine? The fake prince thought about those noble ladies at the banquet. They had thin waists and smelled fragrant. They were beautiful and enchanting. If it was in the past, they wouldn't even look at him. But now that he had become a prince, those women all stared at him with burning eyes. The fake prince who suddenly got rich was a little arrogant. He had never enjoyed anything before, and now that he did, his heart naturally changed. He asked the prince what kind of concubine he wanted. The king decided to find a noble lady from his own country to be his concubine. If he found someone from another country, once something happened, they would run away. The prince looked at so many beauties. All of them were decent, but he had to think of a way to choose one to be his concubine. So, the prince suggested that there was a fruit in the forest that grew on trees. It was really sweet, but there was a hornet's nest. If any lady could pick the fruit, she would be the concubine. When they heard that, some noble ladies were unhappy. Some felt that the prince was testing them and decided to go to the forest to pick the fruit. Looking at these high and mighty proud young ladies picking the fruits because of his words, they even had smiles on their faces and looked like they were willing to do so. Power and wealth were really good things. The prince decided to work hard. He was a prince now and would become a king in the future. Chapter 2963. Becoming the person with the most power in the country, using the best things, eating the most delicious food, and having the most beautiful girls. The king was very pleased to see the prince studying so hard. In the past, the prince was a bit rebellious and ignored his father. But now, the prince was very obedient. The king thought that it was because the prince had encountered a disaster, which made him calm down completely. In the future, when the country was in the hands of the prince, he could rest assured that the country would become stronger. However, the prince's indifference to the former princess made the king a bit puzzled. Logically speaking, his son should have angrily gone to the former princess, but there was no movement at all. The prince just said that she would regret it in the future. The prince was very ambitious. When he became the king, he would conquer the princess's country and annex her country, and she would have no one to rely on. Now, the fake prince seemed to empathize with her. He felt insulted by others and wanted to fight back to defend his dignity. In the past, he would not have dared to think like this. Wealth and power would allow people to freely decide what kind of person to be. If one chose to be a kind person, one would have enough capital to become a kind person, donate money, and help others. It could also allow people to do whatever they wanted without any worries. The prince's mentality was slowly changing, and he was getting more and more used to his identity as a prince. The noble ladies who went to pick the fruit were full of bumps on their heads, and their faces were swollen like a pig's head. They thought that they had taken the fruit back, but the prince tasted it and said that it did not taste right. The noble ladies wanted to cry but had no tears. They did not become the princess, but their faces were disfigured. They did not dare to go out until the swelling subsided. The noble ladies who did not look for the fruit were glad that they did not look for it. Maybe the prince was just playing with them. But there were also people who insisted on looking for the fruit. Once the prince said that it did not taste right, they kept looking. Anyway, it was just torturing. It was not that easy to become the princess. In the king's city, all kinds of fruits suddenly became popular, especially the strange ones. Maybe this kind of fruit was what the prince needed. Many people went into the forest to look for the fruit. The prince smiled sarcastically. The things that he used to have to fill his stomach had become so popular now. The real prince would occasionally overhear the maids talking about the prince. They would talk about the prince's actions, and the maids would say how handsome the prince was, blah, blah, blah. The true prince's heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys all shifted positions. He was in so much pain. Why was the heavens so unfair to the people who took his position? Why did they let evil people take over his position? Deceiving everyone. The prince was tormented and even wanted to end his miserable life. But he wasn't willing to give up. He wanted to take back his prince and become the future king. The prince was in pain, but Ning Shu, who was in the deep sea, was also in pain. This was because Her Majesty had started to give birth again. Previously, it had been peaceful for a period of time. Now, it had started again. Her Lady Queen said, "Previously, I gave you a period of time to let you feel sad. It's about time. Hurry up and give birth. Your sisters already have babies." Ning Shu was speechless. "It's so suffocating. I just don't want to reproduce." Regardless of Ning Shu's wishes, he pulled a row of male mermaids for him to choose from. It was like breeding. It really made him feel quite helpless. What could Ning Shu do? Of course, he refused. He said that it wasn't good that his sisters already had children. Why did he have to give birth to little mermaids? This wasn't his responsibility. Sorry, he wouldn't do any additional requests outside of the mission. And he didn't even know how mermaids reproduced. How could he applaud for love? Ning Shu swam to a hidden place to cultivate when he had nothing to do. Sometimes, he would sing loudly. Although his singing wasn't very good, because it was the throat of a mermaid, his singing was mellow and pleasant. From then on, Ning Shu fell in love with singing. The fishermen and sailors who passed by were so scared that they trembled. Some merchants who specialized in catching mermaids were very happy when they heard the singing of mermaids. As long as they caught a mermaid, they would be rich. Ning Shu cleared his throat and sang for a while. When he stopped, he heard screams for help. To humans, mermaids were screaming. They didn't speak. But mermaids didn't communicate with words. They used cries. Ning Shu heard another mermaid crying for help. He jumped off the reef with a plop and quickly swam towards the source of the sound. Sure enough, he saw a big ship with two mermaids caught in a fishing net. The people on the ship excitedly pulled the fishing net up. The two mermaids struggled but couldn't break free. Their expressions were full of despair. The tears that flowed out directly turned into pearls and rolled into the sea. Ning Shu swayed his tail and jumped up, directly grabbing the fishing net. Another mermaid came. "Quickly cast the net, quickly, we're rich." Ning Shu pulled the fishing net with all his strength. The strength was so great that he directly pulled the human who was pulling the net down the ship. Together with the mermaid and the fishing net, they were all taken away by the sudden appearance of the mermaid. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared. The human who fell into the sea flopped and was pulled onto the ship by his companions. If the ship wasn't big enough, it might have capsized. Damn, was that mermaid Hercules? The two mermaids that were in his hands were gone just like that. The wealth that was in his hands disappeared in the blink of an eye. He really couldn't accept the difference in his heart. After two mermaids, he became rich. Another mermaid came, he became rich. In the end, there was none left. Ning Shu untied the fishing net. The two mermaids' shoulders trembled as they cried and thanked Ning Shu. "Thank you, Princess. Otherwise, we would have been caught by the humans. Why did you run to the surface of the sea? It's very dangerous there." Even Ning Shu felt that it would be a little difficult to escape if he was caught. The mermaids were out of the water. Their tails became their biggest armpits. They couldn't walk or jump. We didn't swim to the surface of the sea. We were under the sea. Those fishing nets were always cast. Those humans wandered around where there were mermaids. We accidentally got caught in the net. Ning Shu nodded and reminded them to be more careful in the future. Try not to go to the surface of the sea. Find a partner and have children. Ning Shu vented the pain of childbirth on others. A younger mermaid asked Ning Shu in a crisp voice, "Seventh princess, why are you so strong that you can save me from the humans?" "Because I am a mermaid with superpowers. My strength is relatively strong." Ning Shu raised his hand and was about to bulge his biceps. Ning Shu brought the two mermaids back and told the queen about this. The queen was so angry that her face turned green. Humans are really getting out of hand. The queen touched Ning Shu's face lovingly. "Fortunately, you saved them. In the future, when you encounter such things, don't run over recklessly." Chapter 2964. Because of this, the queen instructed the mermaids not to go to the surface of the sea as much as possible. The humans wandered around on the surface, waiting for the mermaids to take the bait. In order to catch the mermaids, the humans went all out. They drove boats to patrol the surface of the sea. Every time they saw a boat swimming above the sea, the mermaids would be frightened. They would scatter and swim deeper. Ning Shu looked at the black boat and felt a little irritated. The price of mermaids was high. As a human, they would set their eyes on mermaids to catch if they could make a profit. If this went on, they would catch all the mermaids. Moreover, mermaids could not always live in the deep sea. They had to float to the surface of the sea to take a breath. Mermaids often went to the reef to sing. That was to take a breath and clear their throats. No one liked to cry for no reason. These songs also covered the mermaids with an evil veil. Ning Shu swayed his fishtail and swam to the bottom of the boat. He scanned the bed to confirm that the people on the boat were here to catch mermaids. Ning Shu raised his arms and did some warm-up exercises. Then he placed both hands on the bottom of the boat. For a moment, the whole boat was lifted out of the water by Ning Shu. The people on the bed staggered and looked at the side of the boat. The boat did not draw water. What was going on? The boat left the water. Could it be that there was some kind of gigantic object under the ship that was arching their ship? The situation was not good. If they did not catch the mermaids, they would lose everything on this trip. Ning Shu turned the boat and swung his hands. The boat was swung round and faster. The people on the boat were dizzy and disoriented. They were not feeling well. Those who were seasick to begin with were now vomiting all over the place. They couldn't even stand properly. Oh my God, what kind of monster was under the boat? It had so much strength. In order to prevent themselves from being thrown off, they held on tightly to anything that was stable in their hands. Which naughty sea creature was it? Soon after, many vines wrapped around the entire ship. These vines grew very quickly, entangling people and things. The entire ship looked green and was completely covered by plants. Oh my God, what is this? It's so scary, I've been entangled. The vines are pricking my leg. Ouch, Ning Shu screamed. His voice was so sharp that the people on the ship couldn't bear it and covered their ears. The mermaids who sang beautiful songs screamed so fiercely and unpleasantly. The other mermaids heard the cries of their companions and rushed over to Ning Shu's side. They probably felt that their companions were in danger and came to rescue them. Ning Shu saw that it was about time. If the mermaids saw him using vines with such great strength, it would be hard to explain. Things like vines could not be used by the client. As for the slightly greater strength, it was easy to explain because this body had already cultivated, so it was normal for it to have greater strength. However, it was difficult to explain the vines. The vines converged like a tide and disappeared without a trace in an instant. It was like an illusion, but the pain in his body was real. Some people had their legs and arms pierced by the vines. In short, they were all injured and bleeding. Ning Shu swung the boat and threw it a little further away. With a plop, the boat exploded and created a big splash. Emily, what's the matter with you? What happened? Little princess, did you hear me screaming just now? Are you okay? A group of mermaids surrounded Uncle Lin and asked. They looked at the overturned boat not far away and said, let's hurry up and leave. There are boats here. We might be caught. Now, the mermaids were subconsciously afraid when they saw boats. The humans kept circling above them and refused to leave. They did not dare to come out of the sea. Ning Shu shook his head and said, I'm fine. The queen also came over and looked at Ning Shu. Didn't I say not to swim out of the sea? Ning Shu screamed to scare the fishermen, but he did not expect to attract the mermaids. The people on the boat were dizzy and disoriented. Many of them were injured and scared. They looked at each other with fear and doubt. Was it the mermaids who did this? Weren't mermaids delicate and liked to cry? Why were these mermaids so fierce? They were not sure if they were mermaids, but the problem was that they had to run. This place was too frightening. The crew members who had yet to recover from their shock immediately steered the ship away. If the vines weren't an illusion, they might have even sunk the passing ships. The reason why they let these people go was that Ning Shu wanted them to spread the message that this place was dangerous. It was useless to hide every time. They had to solve the problem from the root. For example, they had to make those who came to catch mermaids feel fear. They had to wait for the next batch of people to come and test it again. After a few times, people would gradually believe it. There were sea monsters in the sea. Those who were not afraid of death should come. Leaving behind a reputation to scare people would make the mermaids more peaceful. The main reason was that mermaids were beautiful and weak. If they did not abuse them, it would be intolerable. When they felt that it was dangerous and unprofitable, fewer people were willing to take the risk. They could also come out of the water to play and sing songs. Apart from the unpleasant humans, there were a few happy things that happened. The sisters all gave birth to little mermaids. Mermaids were viviparous animals. The little mermaids that were born were the size of newborn puppies. They were naked and had small scales. It was probably because of their talent. They could move their tails and swim in the sea for a while. But they did not have the strength to swim for too long. The queen mermaid hugged the little mermaids with different tails and smiled happily. She hugged and coaxed them. When she saw Ning Shu stretching his neck to look at these little mermaids, she immediately urged, you should also quickly find a partner to give birth to. Ning Shu was expressionless. Born for what? To play. If you don't play with children, it will be meaningless, the queen said. Ning Shu, he did not want to play with children. Ning Shu expressed that he did not like children at all. He would not play with children if they played with him. The newly born little mermaids diverted some of the queen mermaid's attention. They played with the little mermaids. When the novelty of this little mermaid wore off, she would start to give birth again. Ning Shu used the same method to scare a few groups of people. There were rumors on the land that the mermaids were very fierce and had extraordinary strength. They could even lift a boat. In order to let people know that the mermaids were teasing them, Ning Shu deliberately exposed his head. His head was wrapped in seaweed and he smeared some mud on his face. He looked particularly ugly and terrifying. He jumped up and did a beautiful flip in the air. The people on the boat were surprised. Then the boat began to turn. Some people who were not paying attention were caught off guard and were thrown off the boat. They were especially frightened. Chapter 2965. It's good to know fear. There were all kinds of rumors about creatures like mermaids on land. Some said that mermaids were ugly, big, and could eat people. The portraits printed in books were particularly fierce. Relying on all kinds of threats, Ning Shu's group of mermaids lived a stable life for the time being. At least now there weren't so many boats hunting mermaids floating around. He and his clansmen could even sit on the reef and sing at night. His days were quite good. He had nothing to do, so he could cultivate and scare people. The only bad thing was that the queen had passed the fun period of playing with children. She wanted to play with the children she gave birth to. She ordered you to give birth whether you wanted to or not. Anyway, she pulled a row of male mermaids for people to choose from. Ning Shu was silent. He felt that it was about time for him to leave. The deepest impression in this world was that the queen urged him to get married. If it wasn't for the fact that the shore was too troublesome, Ning Shu really wanted to see how the prince was doing now. He didn't know how the witch was controlling the prince's soul now. There was no source of information in the sea. Ning Shu was really at a loss. He couldn't be at ease if he didn't take a look. And he couldn't find clothes on the shore. Even if there were sunken ships, they were probably rotted by the sea and couldn't be worn at all. The mission was almost completed. Ning Shu began a treasure hunt. There were no treasures around each clan. At most, there were pearls and gems collected by the mermaids. These things were useless to Ning Shu. These things couldn't be sold at a good price even if they were sold in the system exchange store. They were trash that no one wanted. Because he could sense places far away in the water, he knew what treasures there were. There were no treasures in other places, but he noticed a strange fluctuation in the sea witch. The last time he went there, he probably had something on his mind. He didn't pay attention and didn't feel anything. But now there was this fluctuation, which meant that the sea witch had some treasure. These witches all had strange things in their hands. Ning Shu decided to find the witch and see what it was. Was it worth it for her to pay a little price to get it? When the witch saw Ning Shu, her eyes kept wandering around his face. Her voice was old and hoarse as she said, "Why, have you decided to become a human?" Now that they were all back, Ning Shu shook his head and said, "I heard that witches have a lot of fun things. Do you have anything interesting, or precious that you can show me?" As Ning Shu spoke, he scanned the small house. He wanted to know where the special wave came from. The witch snorted coldly. This little princess was really unruly. As soon as she came over, she asked what was fun and what was fun. There was nothing fun in the witch's place, only deadly things. The witch sneered. "Did your elders tell you that witches are dangerous people? Aren't you afraid that I'll curse you if you get so close to a witch? And tell the queen that you want to become a human." Ning Shu shrugged. "It doesn't matter. I'm just asking anyway. I've never thought about becoming a human. It doesn't matter if you tell my mother." Ning Shu looked at the bubbling pot of unknown liquid and asked, "Do you eat this kind of thing? It doesn't look appetizing." Ning Shu felt strange. Why didn't he scan it for so long and didn't find anything? Moreover, the things in this house were disgusting. They were not all kinds of fish bones, but some strange things. However, Ning Shu found a mermaid skin. The skin had been cut open, and the scales and skin were well preserved. Only the skin was missing. And the color was so familiar. It was especially blue, like a sapphire. It couldn't be Lan En's corpse, right? Didn't she already bury Lan En? How did the skin appear here? And someone else cut it open. Ning Shu felt that Lan, the mermaid, was miserable. His body was occupied and now he was made into a fur. If the mermaid's tail was draped over the body, it would be absolutely dazzling. Ning Shu looked at the witch with a sullen face. "Why is his body here? What did you do to him?" "I'm just taking back my reward. And this mermaid promised that after he died, this body would belong to me," the witch said righteously. But her voice was really unpleasant to hear. Ning Shu frowned. "What kind of deal did Lan make with you that you have to give up your body?" "This is my contract with him. I don't need to tell you. Although I'm a witch, I still have the most basic integrity. The witch sneered. This is my thing. Don't even think about taking it away. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes. So the one who made the deal with the witch was the previous Lan, and definitely not the official. With the official's arrogant appearance, how could he condescend to make a deal with a witch? He estimated that he could kill this witch with a slap. He didn't know what kind of deal he made with the witch, but Lan's body was finally occupied by the official. He didn't know what happened in the past. When he asked the witch refused to say. There were intelligent creatures in the sea, and mermaids were the most famous. Everyone knew that there was a witch, and mermaids were warned by their elders not to get close to witches. But some mermaids still came into contact with witches for various reasons. The witch stared at Ning Shu's beautiful face, and the voice that came out of her mouth was charming and moving. It was very pleasant to hear and intoxicating. If you want me to tell you, that's fine, but you have to pay a price. This old woman never makes a losing deal. The witch coaxed Ning Shu. You really don't want to know what Lan wanted to exchange, or whether it's related to the future of your mermaid race. Ning Shu, I don't want to know. Ning Shu reached out, picked up a long spoon, stirred the things in the pot, and scooped up 2 black beads. What are you doing? Put down my things. When the witch saw Ning Shu being so rude, she immediately grabbed the spoon, but some inexplicably colored soup spilled out of the pot and splashed on the witch's face. It made a sizzling sound, like sulfuric acid. Ning Shu asked, "Is your face okay?" The witch seemed to not feel the pain on her face. She put the beads at the bottom of the pot and boiled them. She turned her head and looked at Ning Shu. I really don't like rude children. Little princess, it seems that you have to suffer a little to know why the creatures in the sea are avoiding me. The witch's eyes glowed fiercely, and she began to chant a spell. It was like a curse on Ning Shu. When the witch finished, Ning Shu asked, "How are you going to punish me?" The faith halo directly blocked the power of the curse/BK. Chapter 2966. Therefore, Ning Shu did not know how the witch was going to punish him. The witch's wrinkled face trembled, but she didn't see her spell take effect. She was not satisfied. Why are you fine? You're finished. Ning Shu shook his head. He glanced at the bubbling pot from the corner of his eye. What kind of bead was that? It was pitch black. Seeing the witch so nervous, it must be something good. In any case, Ning Shu did not see what it was. The witch looked at Ning Shu warily. Her nose twitched, wanting to smell something from Ning Shu's body. Then she laughed, looking quite malicious. Little princess, you look full of vitality. Ning Shu grunted. Of course he was full of vitality. After all, he had the rules of life. He did not know what this witch was thinking. The witch said, Little princess, give me your face and voice. I will fulfill your wish. Ning Shu asked, Then do you know what I'm thinking now? The witch nodded. Of course I know. You want to become a human. Ning Shu shook his head. Wrong. Guess again. It was so obvious. Could she not see it? Her eyes had already landed on the pot. It was obvious that she was looking at the witch. The witch picked up a spoon and scooped a bowl of soup for Ning Shu. Drink. You will be very happy after drinking this. Didn't you want this? Ning Shu grunted. He took the bowl and smelled it. The smell was simply overwhelming. After simmering for a long time, it seemed to be full of vitality. What kind of soup was this? The witch scooped a bowl for herself and gulped it down. After drinking it, her face was filled with comfort and contentment. Under Ning Shu's gaze, the wrinkles on her face lessened a lot, and even her eyes began to clear up. Previously, she was a hunched old woman. Now, the witch was a 30-year-old woman. Damn, this disgusting soup actually had the effect of rejuvenating. It could even beautify one's face. Seeing Ning Shu in a daze, which Ning Shu winked. If it was a wrinkled old woman throwing flirtatious glances at him, it would naturally not look good. But now, the image of witches was not so bad, and this blink of an eye was a little seductive. Why are you in a daze? Drink it. Don't you like this stuff? Drink it and you'll enjoy extreme happiness. Ning Shu, could it be something like self-made drugs and extreme happiness? Even if he was really happy, he couldn't bring himself to eat the soup that was neither yellow nor green nor black. He brought it to his nose and sniffed it. There was a hint of vitality in it. It seemed that the witches had found something with a lot of vitality to boil this pot of soup. It's so disgusting, I don't want to drink it. Ning Shu poured it back into the pot, picked up the spoon, scooped the 2 beads into his bowl, and looked at them. The witch was immersed in her youthful beauty. Seeing Ning Shu's action, she immediately became angry. Little princess, what are you doing? Give this thing back to me. Ning Shu held the bowl. Let me see what this thing is. It looks like a black pearl. Could it be that you're cooking a pearl milk tea? Ning Shu, while avoiding the witch, picked up the beads, observed the beads, and put it to his ear to listen to the movements inside. The witch was so angry that her face was distorted. She picked up the broom and hit Ning Shu. Put down my things. Let me out, get out. Inside the beads, he could vaguely hear someone's voice, but he couldn't hear it clearly. Could it be that there was a soul inside this black bead? Emily, put my things, if you don't want your whole body to rot. The witch was flustered and exasperated. Her originally youthful face was now rapidly covered with wrinkles, and her body began to hunch. She had become the short and old witch again. It was like magic. Ning Shu almost understood. This pot of soup had the effect of making people younger, but it didn't seem to last long. After a while, it would return to its original appearance. Ning Shu stopped and looked sharply at the witch. There seems to be a mermaid inside. Mermaids had a special sound, which was a language of communication. The witch didn't even think about it and said, "You heard wrong. How can there be a mermaid? How can such a small bead hold such a big mermaid?" Ning Shu said, "Not the body, but the soul." "Good, old witch. You captured us mermaids, boiled them into soup, and imprisoned their souls. I want to go back and tell my mother," Ning Shu said as she took the 2 pearls and was about to leave. "Stop, did I say you could go?" The witch controlled Ning Shu. Ning Shu took advantage of the situation. She just wanted to trick the witch, pretending that she couldn't move her body. The witch took the 2 beads from her hand, and her rough and old hands touched Ning Shu's face. The calluses on her hands made her face uncomfortable. It's good to be young, with such delicate skin, thick hair, and bright red lips. The witch sighed, showing jealousy. Ning Shu let her touch and didn't resist. She said with grievance, "I am so beautiful, so young. We mermaids are so beautiful until we die. Beauty is not something I can decide. If you want to blame it on your ugly appearance, you must have done something bad to make you old." The witch's face trembled. She found that this little princess really had the ability to anger people to death. So what if you mermaids are beautiful? You are just fish in the sea, caught by humans and eaten. Ning Shu looked at her. You really are eating mermaids. What's wrong with eating fish? The witch smiled, but her smile was particularly ugly. There seemed to be nothing wrong with this logic. Ning Shu's face was filled with anger and confusion. She looked agitated, but her body could not move. Why do you want to eat mermaids? Other than the mermaids that were captured by humans, did you eat all the mermaids that disappeared? Damn, the client was a little mermaid who didn't know anything. She actually came to this witch to make a deal. This witch seemed to have a good business reputation. She didn't put the little princess in a pot to stew her. She probably wanted the little princess's throat, and there was a contract, so she couldn't do anything to the little princess. The little princess wanted a pair of legs, so the witch couldn't keep her. The witch said, "You mermaids are so young, it's too enviable." Ning Shu said, "Old lady, this kind of thing can't be done with jealousy. Jealousy has changed you." The witch's face trembled. "Shut up, I used to be a young woman." Ning Shu said, "I said it was in the past. Did you eat mermaids to restore your youthful appearance? This is called maintenance. Little girl, what do you know? Then why did you trap the souls of my people?" Ning Shu stared at the pot and asked. "Be careful, or I'll kick the pot over, /BK. Chapter 2967. It was one thing to eat mermaids and fish, but why did they have to imprison their souls? They didn't even have the chance to enter the world of reincarnation. The witch said, "Mermaids not only have good meat and fragrant meat, but their souls are also very delicious and full of vitality." Ning Shu asked, "Other than the mermaids you made a deal with, do you catch other mermaids? Why are there so many people who want to catch mermaids? They want to make mermaids cry and eat meat. Is it my fault that I am beautiful? People are all relying on their beauty to commit crimes. The beauty of mermaids doesn't bring any benefits to mermaids. Sometimes it's not enough to eat. Besides, other than you mermaids, I like to eat anything that is full of vitality." The witch thought that Ning Shu was immobilized and deliberately angered him. At the same time, she touched Ning Shu. She was especially infatuated with Ning Shu's soft and smooth skin and his waterfall-like hair that was slightly curly like seaweed. It was very thick and very beautiful. Her gaze was scorching as if she was looking at a lover. Ning Shu was extremely disgusted. "Touch me. You are still so old and ugly. Even if you eat mermaids and other creatures full of vitality, you can only retain your youthful appearance for a moment." Ning Shu hesitated for a moment. "There is something I don't know if I should say." The witch narrowed her eyes. Her originally deaf eyelids completely covered her dim yellow eyes. "What is it? It's not that you are beautiful because you are young. You are beautiful because you are beautiful. There is no difference between being ugly and being young or old. Old lady, you are not beautiful when you are young. You are even uglier when you are old. Why do you have to painstakingly go back to when you were young? You were not beautiful when you were young. Because being old and ugly is not beautiful. When you were young, you were really ugly. You didn't even have a fig leaf. There was a saying that you were ugly not because you were fat." Ning Shu's face was full of sincerity. The witch was so angry that her long nose was about to become crooked. She was wrong. She shouldn't have listened to this blabbermouth mermaid. Instead, she was so angry that she was half dead. Why didn't this mermaid be captured by humans and suffer a little? When humans tortured creatures, they were outstanding. Not to mention other creatures, she was even more outstanding among her own kind. If this girl were to fall into the hands of a human, she would cry herself blind. The witch's lips trembled and she couldn't say anything for a long time. She looked at Ning Shu with fierce eyes. Ning Shu continued, "You actually ate souls directly. Don't you get diarrhea? Do you think you're an abyssal prefect? Even if the black fog ate something wrong, it would vomit and have diarrhea." The witch looked at Ning Shu as if he was a stupid mortal. "I'm a witch. Of course I have my ways." Ning Shu's face lit up. "Don't tell me it's because of the bead. Look at you boiling the bead in the pot. You're so stupid." The witch took a deep breath. She couldn't talk to her. She couldn't. He was a brat who didn't know any manners. He didn't even teach the mermaid queen how to teach him. "I'm going to stew you. I'm going to cook your body together with your people. The vitality in your body will definitely allow me to return to 18 years old." The witch laughed happily. allowing her prey to struggle before death. She had sharp teeth. Let's see if she can still speak after death. Ning Shu looked helpless. You didn't look good when you were 18 years old. I don't understand why you want to return to your youth. She wouldn't be able to maintain her appearance for long. One moment she was young, the next she was old. How annoying. Ning Shu said, I can provide a way for you to maintain your youth. The witch snorted and looked down on him. What can a little girl do? You can return to your youth and then kill yourself. This way, you'll stay young forever. But there's a side effect. I can't guarantee whether your soul will be young or old. Although your body is young, I can't guarantee that your soul will be young. You might even have an old and stooped appearance. Ning Shu's suggestion was sincere, but it made the witch so angry that she was about to explode. She shouldn't have asked. Why did she ask this guy? She grabbed Ning Shu and dragged him to the big pot. She wanted to throw Ning Shu, this noisy and irritating girl, into it. When I drink your soup, you'll know how beautiful I was when I was young. But at that time, you won't be able to see it. What a pity. Ning Shu calmly stretched out his foot and kicked over the pot of soup. Then he looked at the sluggish witch with a smile. You see, you can't throw me into the pot like this. The witch wailed. Her voice was rough and unpleasant. She rushed to put the thick soup back into the pot. She had no time to think about why the little mermaid wasn't frozen. The witch's face was twisted with heartache. She was actually lying on the ground and licking the soup that she couldn't lift. Ning Shu took 2 beads from the pot and watched the witch lick the soup as if she was wiping the floor. Under the effect of the soup, her body began to become slender and young. But because of heartache, her face was twisted. Ning Shu took advantage of this emptiness and directly invaded the black bead with his consciousness. This bead was a black space. There were many souls wandering in it. There were even human souls. It seemed that this witch not only ate mermaids, but also other sea creatures. She even ate humans. In addition to these, the mermaid souls were the most. More than half of them were standing. Mermaids with different colors of tails were floating and wagging their tails. It seemed that mermaids were the witch's main prey. No wonder the number of mermaids was getting fewer and fewer. Humans were hunting them, and witches were eyeing them covetously. There were also various kinds of accidents. They were too beautiful, and people missed them. These souls were tied up in the black bead. Ning Shu wanted to take these souls for himself, but if he sent them to the main system for purification, they would die very rhythmically. But how could he release these souls from the bead? Ning Shu didn't want to smash the bead. This kind of thing was a bit like a soul bead. He couldn't bear to do it. And he didn't know if the bead was smashed, the souls inside would disappear because of the collapse of the world. Most of the soup on the ground was wasted. No matter how the witch tried to save it, she couldn't save much. The witch, who had become young, was furious. Especially when she saw that the black bead in the pot was gone, she was so angry that her chest trembled. The young witch was twice as tall as when she was old. She was tall and straight, with curves in front and back. Unlike when she was old, she was like a shriveled persimmon. You're courting death. It's not just life or death. If you provoke a witch, don't think about living. The witch only thought that her spell had lost its effect because it took too long. She used the same trick again to freeze the little mermaid. She couldn't let her die so easily. She had to pull out her scales one by one. The mermaid's tender skin was full of gelatin. /BK Chapter 2968. Drinking this kind of cutin can make a person's skin better, perhaps returning to their youth in a short time. And drinking the mermaid soup, the young skin will become more tender and smooth. This mermaid is at least a princess. In fact, The witch has always wanted the queen of the mermaids. She came to the sea and saw the queen, but time has not left a mark on the queen. What he saw before was the same as what he saw before. And she seems to be getting more and more beautiful. The witch especially wants to take the queen away, and also looks forward to the queen coming to her to make a deal. But the queen has to protect the tribe and will not easily leave the coral palace. The witch can't just run over and snatch the fish. With so many mermaids, she may suffer a loss. The witch suddenly thought of a way that would allow her to obtain the queen, and at the same time, make this girl suffer. Mother and daughter will not give up either. The witch calmed down. I have to ask your mother how she taught you to be so impolite. You are in my hands, your mother will come to find you. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes, his mind quickly turning, looking at the greedy eyes of the witch. Even if she is young, her face is still ugly because of greed and jealousy. Ning Shu said without much care, why are you looking for my mother? My mother is the queen. Even if I am in danger, she will not come back to find me and put the tribe in danger. Without the queen, the tribe is like without a leader, and the mermaid tribe will fall into panic. It will be easier to encounter danger. The witch said meaningfully, that is not necessarily true. You will be the new queen in the future. Your mother will not give up on you, she will definitely come to save you. Speaking of which, I can eat 2 queens like this. The queen should have more vitality. Ning Shu had a certain idea in his mind. Where did the dagger given by the last sister of the consignor come from? She said that if she wants to become a fish tail again, she can only come back to life by killing the prince and splashing his blood on her legs. Otherwise, she will become a bubble. Then the question is, when mermaids eat, a fish holds and nibbles, where did the dagger come from? Is it possible to find a weapon in the shipwreck? But the dagger obviously has the power of the witch. Killing the prince requires the prince's blood to remove the effect. This was definitely the work of a witch. Anyone who did business with a witch would have to pay a price. To get the dagger, the mermaid would have to pay with her life and body. So, that dagger was most likely the one the queen had used to make a deal with a witch, and her sister had found a way to hand it over to the person who had entrusted her with it. However, the client failed and turned into a bubble the next day. If it was the queen who made the deal, then she would definitely die. The 2 queens had died just like that, leaving them without a leader. Plus, Prince Hickle had lost a mermaid and wanted to catch another one. Coupled with the harvesting by humans, the mermaids were probably going to be wiped out. Ning Shu's face sank. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. Witches actually coveted the queen. Eating mermaids was nothing, but eating the mermaid queen was the real deal. In addition to the fish waiting to be hooked, the witch would definitely catch the mermaids herself. Witches were not good people. This was something that the mermaids had been constantly brainwashing. They would not look for witches unless they had no other choice. Where did that witch get so many mermaid souls? Ning Shu bared his white teeth. Why are you looking for my mother? I can get rid of you. Compared to the great fanfare of humans, witches hid in the dark and secretly caught mermaids, but humans caught too many of them. Witches were the biggest threat. When humans caught mermaids, they could sink into the deep sea and hide. But when it came to witches, they couldn't hide. Witches also lived in the sea, hiding in the dark and killing mermaids who didn't know anything. Ning Shu felt that the fluctuations he had felt before were probably the fluctuations of the soul in the bead, making her mistakenly think that some treasure was coming. You can get rid of me? The witch didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Such a weak mermaid, even if it was a strong male mermaid, was in front of her. Ning Shu stretched out his hand and dug his ear. Old witch, you are really noisy, but I also figured out something. The witch was surprised that the little mermaid was able to break free from her control again and again. Then, what was even more shocking was that vines grew out of the little princess's hand. The vines quickly extended and directly trapped her. The witch was tied up tightly, and the vines were very strong, causing her body to be in pain. The witch was a little flustered, and even made her body return to her short and old appearance, but she was still tied up by the vines. "Let me go, or I will curse you." The witch was shocked. "What the hell are you? Mermaids don't have such ability." Her hand could grow vines, and the vines grew very fast. The witch had never seen such a situation, and angrily threatened Ning Shu. Ning Shu took the 2 black beads in his hand and played with them. He lightly said, "Curse me with what?" The witch's dim yellow eyes turned. "I will curse you to become the loneliest mermaid in the deep sea. Your appearance will become ugly as time passes, just like a human. You are the ugliest mermaid." Ning Shu stuck out his tongue and pulled open his eyelids to make a face. "Ha ha ha, you are ugly, and you want others to be like you. I won't be ugly, you will be ugly." Ning Shu felt that he could learn a bit of the power of curses when he had nothing to do. After being cursed, it would be very uncomfortable if he did not curse back. There were so many law cities, so many law incarnations, so there were also laws like prophecies and curses. The witch almost spat out a mouthful of old blood and exploded in anger. "How do I release the soul inside?" Ning Shu asked the witch. The witch laughed. "I won't tell you. Kill me if you can." Ning Shu grunted and directly used the vines to pierce the witch's heart. The witch's face twisted in pain, and she looked at Ning Shu in disbelief. Didn't he want to know how to release the soul inside? Why did he kill her? Ning Shu spread out his hands and said, "This is your request, I will satisfy you." He casually asked the witch how to release the soul. If she released the soul, she could study the beads, but it did not mean that the witch could threaten her. She must get rid of the witch. No matter how many mermaids there were, it would not be enough for the witch to eat. It felt like the witch treated the mermaids as her own fish, and it was very convenient to catch one when she wanted to eat. The witch's vitality was tenacious, and her heart was pierced. She spat out blood and looked at Ning Shu with hatred. /BK Chapter 2969. The witch panicked and chanted a spell to save her life. As soon as the vines were pulled out, the witch's heart would definitely bleed. Now that the vines were stuck in her heart, to some extent, it would stop the bleeding. This made the witch feel that she could be saved. "Save me, I can tell you how to release the souls inside. Without my order, these souls can't leave. Only I can break the spell." The witch had no choice but to look at Ning Shu, who was playing with the beads. He looked like a child who was very interested in his toy and was particularly engrossed. The little mermaid was very good-looking, and his focused look was indescribably beautiful, but this scene made the witch feel terrified. Her life was gradually fading away. The witch didn't want to die, so she could only beg the little mermaid Ning Shu to save her. Ning Shu shook his head. "No, I don't want to know now. I want to figure out how to release them myself." Pfft. The witch really vomited blood. In the past, the methods that made humans and underwater creatures afraid were useless on this little mermaid. Then. The witch saw the blue scales from the corner of her eyes and her brain flashed. "Then I'll tell you what Lon traded with me." Ning Shu said, "The fish are dead. Even if he had a deal, it's useless. I don't want to know." When the witch heard this, she swallowed the blood in her mouth with difficulty. She didn't dare to bleed anymore. The smell of blood would attract hunters. Smelling the blood, they might tear her apart. Even if the little mermaid didn't kill her now, it might attract other creatures. She had never hated children so much. The word "naughty child" appeared in front of the witch's eyes. She always suffered in the hands of the little mermaid. In the past, she thought that the little mermaid was a newborn calf who wasn't afraid of tigers. She didn't have any respect for the witch. The elders in the family didn't tell her that witches were scary. In the end, This girl was a violent mermaid. She had eaten so many mermaids, but she had never seen such a mermaid. How could a mermaid have such an ability? If all mermaids had such an ability, how could she have eaten so many mermaids? What was wrong with this little princess? She wasn't afraid of her because the other party had power. The witch hated how she had provoked such a reckless and willful mermaid. No, you don't know what Lan's transaction means to the entire mermaid clan. As long as you promise to let me go and send me ashore, I will tell you. Ning Shu shook his head. My mother said that witches are good at coaxing people into signing contracts. If I agree with you, it's over. The witch was angry and anxious. This little mermaid was so difficult to deal with. She used to know that the mermaid princess was innocent and kind, and was the cutest mermaid of the mermaids. God was so fucking innocent and cute. He was simply a demon. Lainin wants to be the leader of the mermaids. Ning Shu responded with an "oh," but he didn't show any expression. Any intelligent creature would want to fight for as many resources as possible. Lan En was really unlucky. His body was taken over by someone else. Before he could become the king of the mermaids, his body was boiled into soup. To die before achieving victory in the first battle would make heroes weep with tears. He shed tears of sympathy for Lan En. The witch looked at Ning Shu, who was still indifferent. Someone wanted to fight for his mother's throne, and he was still so indifferent. Was he his biological child? Ning Shu tilted his head and asked, why does Lainin want to be the king of the mermaids? In addition to having more mates and more food, he also has other ambitions. Does he want to deal with humans? The mermaids were badly bullied by humans. The witch was shocked, and her weak eyes lit up. Let me go first. Ning Shu said, forget it, I don't want to ask. He was too lazy to argue with the witch. The smell of blood soon attracted hunters. Another vine pierced the witch's heart. The witch cried out in pain as blood spurted out. Her heart had been pierced by the vine and was badly mutilated. Completely out of the ordinary, the witch could no longer use her power to chant spells. She struggled in pain for a few moments and died. Her soul floated out of her body. Ning Shu rushed over, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws. The witch's soul was still old and short. Ning Shu shook his head and clicked his tongue. Sure enough, your soul is still so old. The witch in the soul state heard Ning Shu's words and looked frightened. You can see me. Ning Shu tilted his head and smiled sweetly. Because of her face, she looked particularly innocent and sweet. Yes. The witch shivered and turned to escape. Ning Shu opened the black hole, caught the witch directly, and threw her in. Who knew if the witch's soul would be harmful in this world? It was better to put her in the world of samsara. The witch suddenly died, and her body lay on the ground. Ning Shu took the bead and left. On the way, he met several fierce hunters, who were obviously attracted by the smell of blood. Ning Shu turned invisible and passed by these giants. But when he approached the mermaids, he saw something like a human floating on the sea. Did someone have an accident in the sea? Ning Shu hesitated for a moment between saving and not saving, and then swam to the sea with his fishtail. When he got closer, it was a man who had fainted, but he was holding a wooden board tightly. Because of this board, he didn't sink into the sea. The man was young, handsome, and dressed in the clothes of a noble. Ning Shu had been in the palace for a while as a human. This man was either rich or noble in human society. With a saber hanging from his waist and a complicated bow tie in front of his chest, he was dressed like this. His identity was obvious. A prince. Ning Shu didn't like princes. She didn't care about Hikkel, and now there was another prince. Why hadn't he been eaten by the fish? There was one prince after another, and he still wanted her to save him. Did he have to drag her into the plot? There was no end to it. Maybe this prince was kind and really liked mermaids. But so what? The mermaids could no longer get the potion, and their fishtails became legs. Looking at him, he must have had an accident in the sea. The weather changed so fast, and the wooden board should be a part of the ship. She didn't know how many days he had been in the water, but his skin was soaked like a steamed bun. Ning Shu touched his nose. He was still breathing. He was not dead. Ning Shu dragged him to a secluded beach, injected some spiritual qi, and then threw him on the beach. The prince was woken up by the pain. When he woke up, he looked around blankly and rubbed his head. It hurt so much. Hey! A slightly low voice sounded. Although it was low, he could still tell that it was a woman's voice, and even a little pleasant. The prince thought to himself as he looked around. Could it be that someone had saved him? Look at the sea, Ning Shu said. /BK. Chapter 2970. The prince followed the voice and saw a head not far from the beach. It was really a head floating on the sea, covered in moss and seaweed, with a face full of mud. When the prince saw this situation, he was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He took a few steps back and hurriedly got up to run. Ning Shu immediately said, "Stop, I have something to ask you. If you run, I'll eat you." Ning Shu showed her sharp teeth. Mermaids might need to eat, so of course they had teeth, but when they encountered danger or threat, they would use their sharp teeth to intimidate others. Other than that, they might be able to bite their opponents, but it was definitely not fatal. That was all. Therefore, mermaids were naturally soft and cute. The reason why Ning Shu did this was to avoid trouble caused by her looks. Love began with appearance, and everyone liked beautiful things. If she appeared with her original appearance, the prince would definitely not look like he had seen a ghost and was terrified. Ning Shu did not want to have anything to do with the prince. If he really liked her appearance, he might come to fish her out every day. The prince tried to calm himself down, but when he saw the head floating on the sea, it was covered in moss and seaweed, and there seemed to be some insects crawling on it. The prince felt nauseous. What the hell was this? It could talk. He had heard that there were beautiful mermaids in the sea, but he did not expect there to be such an ugly thing. It was so disgusting. Her face was covered in mud. He did not know if it grew on her face or was smeared on her face. The prince could not see clearly from a distance, but he could see the white teeth. It was so strange. Ning Shu spoke again, "You are a human on the land, right? Tell me anything interesting on the land. If you tell me well, I'll let you leave." The prince asked instead, "What are you? Have you heard of mermaids?" Ning Shu said gloomily, "Mermaids are ugly and cruel. They like to eat humans, completely different from mermaids who are not kind and good at cutting throats. Tell me something interesting, or I'll eat you." Ning Shu smiled gloomily. She wanted to ask about Hickle, but she could not ask directly. The prince asked, "What do you want to hear?" Of course it's something interesting. Usually, the secrets of the royal family would be magnified and transmitted. No one cared about the life and death of ordinary people. The prince rummaged through his mind, trying to find some so-called interesting stories, but after telling a few, they were all rejected by Ning Shu. So boring. Boring. Is there anything else? It's all about princes and princesses. It's so disgusting. I want something interesting, something that you want to divorce. Think about it again. Ning Shu reminded the prince. Could it be that the prince didn't know about Hickle? The prince was a respected person on the continent. Now that he had to tell a story to an unknown monster, he felt very wronged. Furthermore, he was denied time and time again. The prince had long since lost his patience. However, the other party's ferocious gaze made the prince's heart tremble. For the sake of his own life, the prince tried his best to recall the scandals of the royal families of various countries. Something interesting happened recently. You'll definitely be interested. Once I'm done, you have to let me go. If it's really interesting, I'll let you go. Ning Shu smiled sinisterly. The prince immediately averted his eyes. Not only was he ugly, he even came out to scare people. If not for the fact that he was alone and had people around him, he would have beaten this bastard into a pulp. The prince felt weak all over. He hadn't eaten for too long, so he didn't have the strength to deal with the sea monster. Prince Hickle was tortured by a witch. His limbs were broken, and even that part of his body was crippled. Everyone said that he must have offended the witch, or that he was so perverted that he deceived the witch's feelings and forced himself on her. That was why the witch took revenge. However, later on, he found a new body. After changing bodies, he's living well now. Many noble ladies want to marry him, but he's playing around with them. The former princess left when he was in trouble, but she came back later. Guess how he took revenge on the former princess who left him? He locked her in a cage with a lion. If the princess could defeat the lion, the matter would be written off. The princess would still be the princess. The princess had no choice but to fight the lion with her bare hands. In the end, the lion tore through her intestines. Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu said, although the former princess was unkind and came back after recovering, she was even worse. She didn't know what she was like. How could she fight a lion? She was going to deliver her head. There was no suspense at all. She was going to die. She was going to die so generously. Ning Shu knew that Princess Karina wasn't someone who would do such a stupid thing. Karina cherished her life and enjoyed wealth. It could be seen from the fact that she immediately abandoned the prince and returned to her own country when something happened to him. She was decisive and resolute. She didn't want to waste her time and life with a useless person. That's because Hickle was attacking their country. The princess country couldn't hold on any longer, so they sent the princess over. They hoped that the princess would remember their old friendship. How could countries give up their old friendship? That's wealth and territory. They knew that sending the princess over was just a fluke. What if it worked? But the princess paid the price with her life. The prince's voice was weak. He had been in the sea for a while and hadn't eaten anything. He was famished, and he still had to tell a story to a monster. Ning Shu pondered. Could it be that he had really switched bodies? What Hickle was doing now was something that Hickle would have done in the past. Fuck, he went through a lot of trouble. In the end, he was still doing well in a new body. What kind of powerful witch could have dispelled the soul anchor spell? Ning Shu asked, what happened to the person whose body was taken over by the prince? The soul was swapped. That commoner suffered the prince's pain, but was taken care of by the royal family. That was really a disaster. Ning Shu still didn't believe it. The soul was swapped so easily. Aren't there any repercussions? If that was the case, it wouldn't be convenient to swap souls in the future. The witch who swapped the prince's soul was famous. There must be many people who wanted to swap souls with her. There were some repercussions. I heard that when the soul was swapped, the prince was unfamiliar with many things. He didn't recognize people or words. It was very, very unfamiliar. But he learned later. He learned very quickly. He probably has some foundation. Ning Shu gave a meaningful, oh. There was such a thing as memory loss. Ning Shu felt that the witch hadn't been able to summon the prince's soul. She had replaced the prince with that unlucky guy, /BK. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.